Why is it so expensive? At home, my son will make such a thing in a couple of minutes and color it even faster. Why such cosmic prices? Emily only pressed her lips together in embarrassment at such words. She was asking for a very small amount of money. But the people of their provincial town, accustomed to saving money on everything, did not want to give such money for the labor of her disabled father, and even covered her with criticism every time. What are these unique works that you are asking so much? Emily tried to sell figurines at the train station, hoping that some of the capital's tourists would appreciate the work. However, she was quickly driven out of there with an offer. Either pay a percentage or get out. Emily would not have refused to pay for the place, but the amount of rent offered by the local collectors was absolutely exorbitant, $10,000 per day. Surprised, Emily questioned the smirking big guy in a tracksuit who was smoking unashamedly next to her. Where am I going to get that kind of money? In a month, if I'm lucky, I won't make all that money. The big guy, enjoying his cigarette, grinned and exhaled the smoke directly into the girl's face. Then Riley remarked, "Do as you please, baby. This is serious business, after all. If you want, you can always pay individually." With this look, he seemed to be inspecting the girl from top to bottom, which instantly made her want to take a shower. "Don't," she replied grimly, lowering her gaze. "I'd better pack my things and go home." With a disappointed shake of his head, the big man stepped aside. You could have made a deal. He held out his hand to Rosa, the odor of which gave away his addiction to tobacco. Staggering sharply to the side, the girl gave a definite warning. "I'm going to scream or call the police. Just try to touch me." The jock lowered his hand and swung it in the air, freezing near Emily's face for a moment, then grinned and said playfully, "And you're smart and pretty, not bad at all. Too bad you're not with us. You could have dressed well and not walk like a bum in the last rags." "I'm not going to deal with bandits," she said in a serious tone as she began to put her things in her gym bag. When Emily was about to leave the platform, the big man suddenly blocked her way with his body. He looked down at her like an insect, smiling nastily. "Let me through," she said through gritted teeth, not looking at him. He bent toward her and spoke quietly but threateningly. "You, Emily, better think," exhaling another stream of smoke and calling her by name. "It would be better for you to be with me, in your best interest. You'll be out of school soon. And then what? Every door in this town will be closed to you. You won't get a job as a janitor, but your mom's already taken care of that. So you won't be able to follow in her footsteps. I already have people to take care of me. I already said I won't come here again. Let me through or I'll really call the police." The bumpkin asked with a sneer, "Are you talking about your father? He won't help you." He looked around and added briefly, "I've said it all. If you try to complain about me, it will be worse. I'll give you a sweet life in this town." You bet Emily, who turned 17 earlier this year, did look a little older than her age, trim thanks to her daily jogging and her technician mother's help cleaning the stores. And at the same time slender as a modest rose, she was unwittingly admired by almost all the boys at school. However, because of her family's low social status, no one, except for criminals like this big guy, he himself looked no more than 20, considered the girl as a love interest. Emily herself never looked for romantic adventures and devoted all her free time exclusively to helping her parents. But even if this scoundrel was suddenly the last man on earth, she would never agree to be his date. The girls saw how near the only nightclub in their small town, gangsters like him left in the arms of young girls dressed in short skirts. Emily didn't need to guess who they were. She was old enough to realize how complicated real life was. But even in her worst nightmare, the girl couldn't imagine such a shameful future awaiting her. Standing in front of an unpleasant threat, Emily began to feel the fear inevitably overwhelming her. After all, she was all alone at the train station, with no one to protect her. Luckily, at that moment, the burly man's cell phone rang. Emily, taking advantage of his moment of distraction, quickly slipped out of his sight. She returned home that day depressed and without money. The calendar showed the last Sunday in May. That meant that Emily had the longest and hardest week before prom, when all her classmates would talk about what dress they would wear, what hairstyle and manicure they would choose for the big event. And guys will try to invite the most attractive girls of the school to the prom. And of course, no one will be invited to spend time at the last school ball in her life, nor will she have any dress, shoes, or manicure. "Honey, are you okay, Olivia?" the girl's mother inquired cautiously. "You're all pale today." Didn't get any sales at all. Emily covered her eyes with her hands, unable to hold back the tears that were about to spill. "My girl, what's wrong? Did someone hurt you?" cradling her crying daughter, the woman asked again. "I don't want to, and I don't want to go to that stupid prom," Emily finally managed to utter, trying to control her sobs. Olivia stroked her daughter's soft, dark brown, glossy hair and looked into her lovely golden brown eyes. "Honey, but prom is one of the most important days in any girl's life, isn't it? Are you sure you want to miss such an important event? There won't be a second time like this in your life," her mother warned her. Emily only sighed a couple times, then sat down on the bed and began to wipe her eyes thoroughly with a handkerchief. "And it's a good thing it won't. I don't want to see any female beauty at this party." The guests would all be bragging about their expensive dresses to each other and drinking cheap red wine, while the class teacher and the principal discussed the biggest gossip of the year in the corner of the gym. Olivia smiled at her daughter, but Emily saw a slight sadness in that smile. "Are you really that worried about not having anything to wear?" she asked affectionately. "I've already put some money aside for a dress for you. And the shoes? You can have my shoes. Do you remember the white ones? I married your father in them?" Her mother's eyes filled with a mist through which unpleasant memories peered. Sometimes Emily marveled at how much her parents loved each other, even though they'd lived together for years and had endured hardships. Olivia had come to this town from the remote countryside, where she had been raised by her grandmother until she came of age. Unfortunately, Olivia was never able to enroll in any educational institution to continue her studies. The knowledge she received in the village was barely enough not to starve to death. The young girl was offered only low-skilled work as a cleaner, or, what was even worse, openly obscene offers. To somehow get a grip in this place and make ends meet, Emily's mother got a job as a floor cleaner in the office of a taxi company located near the station. It was there that she met Jack, her future husband. Jack had been working as a cab driver for several years and was earning quite well. He was immediately attracted to a modest, pretty cleaner who came to their town from the provinces. Her purity and openness touched the man's heart, so soon the cab driver invited the girl to their first date, after which he and Olivia began to officially meet. About a year later, the couple played a wedding, after which the young people happily lived in marriage for almost 10 years. During this time they had Emily, an adorable daughter. All this time, the woman continued to work in a taxicab company, and her husband drove shuttling residents to and from the suburbs. The salary Olivia received was not much, but thanks to Jack their little family kept afloat, being able, though not lavish, but to buy everything necessary for life. That year, however, when little Emily turned 11, trouble came knocking on their door. Jack was driving an elderly couple from the village back to the city. The weather that fall was very wet, and it was raining all the time. Because of this, the driver had to be doubly attentive on the wet road, making sure that he could fit into the next corner or slow down at the traffic lights. The elderly people Jack was driving were, as it turned out, very talkative and overly emotional. They were always dissatisfied and threatened to file a complaint against the cab driver. Because of this, Emily's father was distracted from the road, trying to subdue the unrestrained couple. In one of these tense moments, the man did not notice the warning sign and, losing control of the control, rammed the iron fence, flying with passengers into the ditch. The car flipped several times on the steep slope before it stopped its sad journey. Fortunately, the elderly passengers were hardly injured, receiving only a few scratches, while Jack's life was endangered. His right arm was so badly damaged that he could have died from loss of blood. Doctors, as if by a miracle, managed to save him, but had to amputate the badly injured arm. When the cab driver came to his senses, he could not believe what had happened. How could it be, he asked himself. I was the pillar of the family. What's going to happen to Olivia and Emily now? Olivia reassured him with great difficulty and assured him that life didn't stop there and they would always be together, regardless of the incidents. She promised to do whatever she could to help the family through the difficult times. From then on, Olivia had to work a lot more. She picked up extra shifts at the town's only hospital and worked at the school where their daughter attended. Jack, though he went through a period of deep despondency, soon gathered his will together. Despite the loss of his arm, he still saw himself as the head of the family and could not allow himself to be completely supported by his wife and daughter. Emily, who was no longer a little girl, actively helped her mother. To find a new source of income, Jack began to develop his left arm and looked for alternative ways to earn money. Driving a cab was now not an option. After 6 months of hard work, he mastered the art of making papier-mâché figurines and weaving bald baskets. For materials, he had to travel to the nearest forest and gather suitable branches for his craft. Jack, who was strong in spirit, was ready to sell the fruits of his art himself. But to this occupation, all the local men who knew Emily's father by sight treated, if not with contempt, then with a slight irony. Here was a normal man, drove people. Now he's gone so far as to sell baskets on the street, they said. That's when Emily suggested that her father sit in his place on a busy shopping street in town, she said. Do you wash the hallways before class? Father refused at first. That's not good for you. I can see how your classmates look at you, can't you? Emily was embarrassed but tried to brush it off, though her father was sadly right. Well, let them, she replied, smiling. It's not like I'm doing this for their amusement. It's because we need the money. You spend so much time on weaving and figurines as it is, and women are more willing to buy such things from women. What about your studies? Father asked doubtfully. What studies? Studying isn't going anywhere, replied Emily simply. I'll trade on the weekends, and I'll start with the grounds. Then I'll go to the market or the train station. There's a lot of people there, maybe we'll make something. Jack furtively wiped a large tear from the corner of his eye. He thanked God every day for his magnificent family, who supported and understood each other in everything. He couldn't have wished for more, except for the hardships of being without an arm. Okay, he agreed. But only after work, straight home. You shouldn't fall behind in your studies because of this. Don't worry, the daughter laughed back. I learn the material quickly, like the teachers say. I'll be fine. Emboldened, Emily shook her father's hand firmly and thought about how much she loved her family. For the sake of her loved ones, she was ready to overcome any difficulties, as long as they were healthy, knew no need, and greeted each new day with joy. Her father, Jack, was rightly worried about how her classmates treated his daughter. Despite Emily's friendliness, the school community was reluctant to accept her into their circle. Rose stood out in class, even becoming one of the most attractive girls and regularly receiving excellent grades in PE, but the other female students only sought to tease her. What, Emily, getting ready for your after-school program? Amelia, the class's recognized beauty, taunted her. Let me guess, you have an extra class today. On carrying a bucket of water or not? Wait, probably obstacle course practice, stairs over a mop. Right? Amelia laughed an obnoxious, hysterical laugh. Emily had to gather her strength not to respond to Amelia with something harsh and insulting. She tried to avoid school conflicts, but her patience was not limitless. Amelia, maybe you should work on your super weight loss drug. Emily spoke calmly, tying the laces on her old sneakers. Vicky's laughter suddenly broke off. Really? He's already making your brain melt. You're laughing like a lunatic, Emily continued. A grimace of anger and disgust appeared on Amelia's face. Emily had guessed her rival's vulnerability, for Amelia was trying desperately to lose weight to fit into a designer prom dress. But the size range of such dresses, unfortunately for Amelia, the slip ended in a size 42. You lowlife, Amelia hissed, barely audible. You'd be better off scrubbing floors. You'll never be able to marry with such a horrible pedigree anyway. It's not worth even trying. All your training in 5-kilometer runs will be for nothing. I don't care if it's 10, Amelia spat out, unable to contain her anger. The most you can be in this town is a summoned girl. And that's if someone doesn't feel uncomfortable sleeping with a girl who's been shoveling dirt like a pig since high school. With those words, Amelia threw a dirty rag left by the cleaning lady in the locker room at Emily with a swing. The rag hit Emily's head with a dirty sound, and all the girls in the locker room laughed with one voice. That's what she should do. Show her, Amelia, where she belongs. Who is she to voice her opinion here? Amelia's friends chimed in, trying to approve of the actions of the class's leading beauty. Emily was shaking with inner indignation and anger. She had never felt such dislike for herself from her classmates. She wanted to disappear, to dissolve like a drop of water in a hot pan. Suddenly, unable to hold back any longer, Emily screamed, "Why don't you all suffocate yourselves with your hatred? You are only interested in gossiping about boys and retelling rumors. You have no other interests but money and clothes. I despise you, you're soulless." Without realizing how she got out of the locker room, Emily ran through the hallways, flying past the astonished students right into the street. "Emily, Emily, class isn't over yet. What's your hurry?" the gym teacher shouted after her. But the girl didn't listen to him. She ran 5 laps in a row before her heart started beating steady again. Emily didn't know where she got such resistance to running, but she was sure that everything in life is given for a reason. If she had the opportunity to develop this skill, then she should take advantage of it. Running was the only way to help her calm down and get her thoughts in order. Trying to regain her breath, Emily approached her classroom. The boys, lined up and unaware of what had happened in the girls' locker room, were watching their classmate in surprise, some even with envy. Watch and learn. The gym teacher waved his hand in Emily's direction. 3 kilometers in 10 minutes, and in those shoes. The Olympians should have included her in their ranks, not like you knuckleheads. On the start left, go, 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 go. He commanded, and after a loud whistle, Emily's classmates ran with dejected faces to perform the standard. "Well done," Emily clapped Emily on the shoulder with the teacher. "Get some rest. This is the first time I've seen results like this in the last 5 years. You have real talent." The gym teacher shook his head and left to follow the high schoolers' run. Emily sat on the lower gym bench, pondering his words. It was too late to start an athletic career, but was there any other way to utilize her running abilities? She never found an answer to that question, especially after the incident in the locker room and the constant taunts from the other girls. Emily wasn't going to go to the prom, but her mom Olivia still persuaded her daughter not to miss such an event. "After all, it's better to get your diploma so you don't have to come back here again," the understanding mother winked. "And don't show them you're scared. If you don't show up for graduation, that's exactly what they'll think." "Okay," Emily sighed heavily and agreed. "Okay, let this be my last fight." Olivia helped her daughter pick out a dress. They eventually found an inexpensive but elegant sapphire-colored slip dress at a second-hand store that perfectly accentuated Emily's athletic figure. The beautiful noble shade of the dress perfectly matched Emily's natural hair color. The wedding shoes, which her mother lent her, harmonized with the outfit and the high hairstyle, which the girl made herself. "It's just a pity I don't have any jewelry at all," Olivia complained, looking sadly at her daughter's festive look. "What do you mean?" "No jewelry." Jack suddenly entered the conversation, smiling at his favorite women. "Dad, what are you?" Emily looked uncertainly at her father, her eyes expressing worry and excitement. "Don't tell me you bought something," she said, resigned at the thought of the extra expense. "I did." Her father nodded with a smile and pulled a small velvet box from his shirt pocket. Rose felt ashamed. Her mother had already spent the money for the magic dress on her, and now her father had prepared something too. "Well, why?" she asked guiltily. Jack held out the box, insisting open it. Emily, with bated breath, opened the box. On a velvet cushion lay a tiny gold pendant in the shape of a star, no bigger than a fingernail on her finger. The 5-pointed star sparkled with rays, with a small bright crystal flashing at each end. In the light, the pebbles created a halo of multicolored lights. My God, its beautiful mother and daughter sighed almost simultaneously. Jack smiled and said, Rose, you are a guiding star to me that keeps me on course, just as Mama is my two bright stars. With these words, he hugged first his wife, then his daughter, who immediately clung to her father's strong shoulder. Thank you, Daddy, Emily spoke through tears of gratitude. I'll never take it off. I'll always wear it on me like a talisman, Emily pondered, feeling the warm message the pendant carried from her father. Jack had arranged with his daughter to pick her up from school in the evening when the festivities were over. Darkness was coming fast in their neighborhood in the evening, and teenagers caught up in the holiday spirit could be especially unpredictable. That was why her father had decided to make sure his daughter was safe, in case drunken classmates wanted to cross the boundaries. When Emily entered the assembly hall where the event was held, many of her classmates were quiet for a moment, recognizing the girl. She looked around, deciding where best to settle down to minimize unnecessary stares in her direction. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to Amelia, who could rightfully be called the queen of the school. A queen is never alone, Emily thought as she watched Amelia, surrounded by an entourage of 3 girls and 2 guys, make her way towards her. Emily noticed that Amelia never wore the coveted dress from the famous designer's brand. She didn't seem to be able to adjust to the demands of the famous fashion line. Instead, she had chosen a tight, extremely short leather dress, the color of which fluctuated between a flesh tone and a bronze powder color. Emily just thought, at least the dress doesn't completely blend in with her body, otherwise you'd think she'd come here without clothes. Well, here comes our Cinderella, Amelia said, stretching her vowels in a long, florid voice. Cute dress. Did you get it secondhand? It's okay, it's okay. You can wear it once, and then it'll come in handy for household chores. Emily gritted her teeth to keep from responding to the provocation. It was at that moment that Amelia noticed the gold pendant around her neck. How lovely, the classmate exclaimed and reached out her hand, trying to touch the jewelry. Don't touch it, Emily sharply pushed her hand away. It was a gift from her father that was priceless to Emily, and the corners of her lips turned into a crooked smile. It should hurt, Amelia said with a dismissive arch of an eyebrow. It's just a cheap thing bought on sale anyway. If I asked for one, my parents would give me a dozen of them. Amelia turned around and led the rest of the boys, who reluctantly followed their leader. Emily chuckled softly. It seemed that even her most loyal fans were beginning to tire of Amelia's arrogance. After the graduation ceremony, the disco began. Everyone was dancing to the upbeat music and hot drinks. Emily was in no mood to dance or to continue the party. Having accepted her documents, she wanted to leave immediately. But the principal asked her to stay, assuring her that this was the last time they would all be together, and Emily stayed. As the slow dance began, Emily noticed a figure approaching her. Emerging from the haze of disco smoke, it was Joseph, Amelia's boyfriend. Hi, Emily, Joseph began, smiling softly. You really look great tonight. Can I ask you to dance? Emily felt embarrassed. Why all this attention from Amelia's boyfriend? And where was Amelia now? Won't your lover get mad? The girl tried to joke back. A shadow of displeasure flashed across the guy's face. No, she won't be upset. She's already fed up with her. Wouldn't you know it? He rolled his eyes upward. Every day it's the same thing, Joseph. Am I pretty, Joseph? Am I losing weight for sure, Joseph? The scale seems to be showing something wrong, and so on. It's impossible with her. Emily could barely contain her laughter. Apparently, he was conveying her character with a great deal of irony. Yeah, she's really self-loving, Emily nodded. Okay, but just one dance. I should be going home soon. Whatever you say, lovely lady. Joseph smiled and, performing an elegant gesture, offered Emily his arm. Emily danced a slow dance for the first time in her life. It was an amazing and inexpressible sensation. It felt as if a swarm of little colored hummingbirds had been released inside her, bringing her whole body to life, making every movement weightless. Joseph never took his eyes off Emily, as if he genuinely wanted to understand who she was, what she liked, and what was in her heart. In her musings, Emily didn't immediately notice the movement behind her. But before she could do anything, Joseph grabbed her firmly by the shoulders and turned her toward his girlfriend. "Here's your swoop," Amelia said, and unceremoniously doused Emily with tomato juice, straight from the bag. Emily froze for a moment, startled by the unexpected aggression. "Drink, drink. Slop on your brat," Amelia snarled, pouring the drink generously over her. "You miserable fool. Did you really believe Joseph wanted to dance with you? Thought he was interested in you?" Amelia laughed throughout the room. Stop it, Amelia. You're completely insane," Emily shrieked, struggling to free herself from Joseph's grip. Once free, Emily began to shake off the sticky liquid. Her dress, her hair, and even her mom's wedding shoes were hopelessly ruined. "God, how can you be such a monster, Amelia? Why do you hate me so much?" Emily said desperately. Amelia grinned again with an almost majestic smile, grinning through all 32 teeth, and prepared to give her venomous reply. "That's the joy of hating you. I just despise you, Emily. Because people like you are always trying to stick out of your filthy hole like mice waiting for someone to deliver cheese for them from the outside. You gotta know your place and keep your head down. What do you think? I didn't see you flashing your legs at our boys in gym class," Amelia said. "Amelia, wake up. I'm just a great runner. And it's nobody's fault that you can't stop eating French fries in packs." Apparently that last remark had finally pissed Amelia off. She swung at her classmate, brought her perfectly painted hand down sharply, and grabbed the chain around Emily's neck, ripping off the pendant Jack had given her. "Thought you could be better than me," Amelia whispered, clutching Emily's gold star in her fist. "But I have money and position in society, and all you have is your mops and a filthy rag that you'll use every day for the rest of your life to lick the floors of this school, or some rundown hospital on the outskirts." Emily tore toward the offending girl, but Joseph grabbed her arms, preventing Amelia from resisting. "Give it back. Give it back now," the girl tearfully shouted. "You have no right to even touch him. You are the most disgusting person I have ever known. Give me back the pendant." Remember, Amelia held the pendant up to Emily's face, knowing full well that she couldn't take it away from her. "You are the pathetic daughter of a cleaning lady, and you can never even come close to being a normal person." In a thick, low voice, Amelia said, "Repeat after me. I know my place, Amelia. I'm the pathetic daughter of a maintenance worker." "Screw you," Emily said with a hateful glare at the leather-clad blonde. Resentment slammed into her head, preventing her from lashing out with an all-consuming sense of anger. "Say it again, or you'll never see your public show again," Amelia uttered, and wanted to throw the pendant to the floor to crush it with the heel of her lacquered shoe. But at that moment the general lights flashed brightly, and the teens saw Headmistress Isabella looking at them with all the sternness only she was capable of. "What is this going on here, Amelia?" she angrily asked the wealthy alumna. After which she glared menacingly at Joseph, who instantly released Emily. The girl didn't hold back her feelings any longer and slapped the suitor with an impressive slap. "You filthy henchman," Emily said through gritted teeth. Then she held out her open palm to Amelia. "Give it back. What you took now." Amelia, who was being looked at reproachfully by the principal, put the pendant back into Emily's palm, being careful not to touch her, after defiantly wiping her hands on her dress. "Isabella, can I go home shivering with humiliation and resentment?" Emily asked her. "My dad's probably waiting for me outside by now." She realized at that moment that she had become an absolute laughingstock in front of all the students and teachers at her school. Isabella looked at the girl with genuine regret and said briefly, "Of course, my dear. The idea of a happy life for you after school is belated," she added. But Emily was already closing the doors to the assembly hall behind her. At the same time to that monstrous part of her now definitive past. After graduation, Emily had been in a terrible state. For almost a month, not wanting to go out, not wanting to discuss what had happened with her parents. When Jack met her outside the school and saw the mental and physical state his daughter was in, The man was ready to tear up. "Daughter, just tell me who the creeps are that did this to you. They're your classmates, right?" "Who cares?" Emily waved it away. "Forget it, Dad. It was just some fools playing a joke on me like that. Fortunately, I don't have to socialize with any of them anymore. I can't see this school at all. Let's go home." The distraught father calmed his daughter down as best he could, but he returned home feeling quite upset. His sacred duty was to protect his own blood, and now this. And Emily, a light-hearted person, flatly refused to reveal the names of the scoundrels. Jack could not, with all his will, burst into the school and shake the information out of the teachers. Olivia reassured her husband, if her daughter doesn't want to talk about it, she doesn't need to be involved. So she has to deal with it on her own. In addition, she assured her husband, Emily always knows that we are there for her, and we will always help her with whatever she needs. Our daughter is very strong. If she needs our help, you and I will know about it, believe me. Emily, meanwhile, was lying flat on her bed, clutching the broken chain from her pendant in her hand. It wasn't even the dress or the nasty words Amelia had said that hurt the most. It was the ruined gift from her father that made Emily angry. She realized that the chain could be repaired, but she didn't want to burden her parents with it, telling them that she'd just taken the pendant off and put it away. Emily contemplated her future. Now that the hated school was over, the girl could for the first time consciously choose what to do with her life next. She realized that she had no prospects in this city. But to enter a good university in the capital for this also required a lot of money. And where to get it from? Ordinary good people from the backwoods. And Emily could not just take and leave her parents. They needed help, including material. The girl listed in her mind what she could do best. But unfortunately, the list of her skills was not long-running, cooking, and the ability to mop floors flawlessly. Geez, Emily thought, was Amelia right? I'm not going to be any good in this life with these abilities, am I? Bitter tears ran down Emily's cheeks. It turned out that her classmate had unknowingly predicted her future. However, Emily was not one to let circumstances get the best of her. So she decided to take action. She planned to work all next year to save enough money. Then she intended to go to large cities, where she wanted to take courses related to office work, and perhaps after that find a good job with decent pay. Emily was ready for hardship for the sake of changing her life and freeing herself from the humiliations of the past. Having discussed her plans with her parents, she felt relieved. They were not against the girl trying to find a decent job. Jack and his spouse rejoiced at the change in their daughter. "I'll try to keep helping you, but I also need to think about my life," she promised her parents. "I want you to be proud of me." A few days later, Emily submitted her resume to an employment agency. She offered her services as a maid and could also work as a cook if needed. Surprisingly, she received a call very quickly. Within a week, Emily was already sitting across from an employee of the agency who scrutinized her characteristics. After scrutinizing her closely, the woman looked Emily sternly in the eye. "How about your stress tolerance? Do you tolerate unusual situations?" normally asked the agency employee. The girl was a bit taken aback, as this was the first time she had ever been asked such a question, but she still replied, "Depends on what you mean by unconventional." The personnel officer raised a perfectly fine eyebrow and began to curl her fingers. "Well, for example, if you were to suddenly be unreasonably, from your point of view, insulted, raised your voice, or, on the contrary, given special attention, perhaps even with elements of slight flirtation." Emily gasped in amazement. "I'm sorry, are you trying to get me a job as a maid? Or, with all due respect, sell me to a not-so-decent establishment?" she asked. The girl realized that after such words she would probably not have a job. However, she couldn't help it. She would not allow herself to be humiliated again. Never again. The employee nodded her head briefly and marked something in her notebook, then looked up at Emily. "So what will you answer?" More or less politely. "Yes, and your response is quite appropriate. I'll report these points to my superiors so they can make a final decision." "That's a warning," Emily interjected. "Consider it a yes," the HR person nodded at her. "Expect to be contacted within 3 days. If you are contacted, then you are accepted. You'll learn the rest of the details of your job directly on the spot. And yes, I almost forgot. You will be required to live on the employer's premises for the duration of your contract. Emily nodded in agreement. This all seemed very strange, but also exciting. She was very eager to be accepted for the position. It promised a very generous salary, which would come in handy to help her parents. And even if these unusual situations arose, she did not intend to give herself any offense. 2 days later, Emily's cell phone rang merrily, informing the girl that she had been accepted as a maid in the house of a wealthy businessman. "Mom, Dad, yay! I have a job now," Emily announced cheerfully to her parents. They said they'd be here to pick me up in an hour. As she ran to pack her things, she felt the excitement and anticipation of her new life. Olivia exhaled a sigh of relief and crossed herself, while her husband, Jack, gently hugged her with the arm that had survived the accident. Emily's mother slowly lowered her head onto her husband's shoulder. "Here's our little girl heading into adulthood," she said quietly. "God, let's hope she does well there." "Don't worry," Olivia. Jack pulled her close. "Remember, you told me yourself our daughter is a very strong person. She'll get through this." When it was time to leave, Emily was overcome with tears. Her parents saw her off with all the warmth of their hearts, hoping that the girl would soon come to visit them for the weekend to share her impressions of her new job. A huge black business class Jeep pulled up behind Emily. Getting into the car, the girl felt the huge space of the cabin, as if she was inside a cruise liner. The driver, a silent middle-aged man, calmly drove her to her destination. In front of the house she was to work in, Emily was stunned. It was a gigantic 4-story mansion of modern style with glass and chrome metal. Emily thought to herself that the owner must really like shopping malls. She followed the head housekeeper, who was bringing her up to speed on her way to the pool. "Try not to make eye contact with Harry when he asks you something," the housekeeper instructed. "Rather, lower your gaze immediately and answer strictly to the point. If, however, you happen to be cleaning and the master enters the room, don't fuss and generally pretend not to notice his presence. Just get on with your work." Harry was used to all the servants moving and working almost silently. You are part of this house, and in a way you are obliged to blend in with it and everything that goes on here. Often we don't pay attention to some of the little whims of the owner. We only call security if we realize it could endanger his life and health. Emily was silent, but she felt as if she was in some modern fairy tale about an enchanted castle, where everyone is silent and can't say a word to the cruel king who rules this high-tech kingdom. The housekeeper's last sentence, however, surprised Emily somewhat. "Pardon me, I believe you said something about whimsy. May I clarify exactly what is meant?" The housekeeper stopped and looked at the girl with a look that looked like she was trying to shine invisible X-rays through her thoughts. "You weren't warned by the agency about possible irregularities, did you?" she asked dryly. "No, why not?" "It was explained to me that there were some special circumstances involved, but what exactly?" The housekeeper raised her eyebrows elegantly. "Well then, you will soon see for yourself." The woman led her toward a large rectangular pool, on whose marble terrace sat a young man reclining in a tank chair. He was wearing large sunglasses, a bright red Hawaiian shirt, and knee-length white shorts. The guy looked to be about 24 to 25 years old. Judging by his relaxed demeanor and the way he calmly flipped through the newspaper lying in his lap, this was the owner's son. "Please," the housekeeper nodded to him. "Emily, our new maid, arrived exactly 10 minutes ago, as the master requested." With that, the lady silently withdrew, leaving the girl and the young man alone. "How do you do?" Emily greeted him politely. "Excuse me, do you know how long we have to wait for Harry?" The man froze, holding the newspaper half open, and then looked at the girl in surprise from under the shimmering glasses of his glasses. "I don't get it," was all he could ask. "Pardon me, but you must be the son of the owner of this house, aren't you?" Emily answered the question with a question. "I just can't get used to how many rules there are around here. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about them before I meet Harry." The young man continued to stare at the maid in mute amazement. She, not knowing what to do or what to do in such a delicate situation, just stood there staring back at him. Finally, the man couldn't stand it any longer and laughed loudly. Emily felt incredibly stupid, but still managed to squeeze out a weak smile in response. "Honestly, I've never had one of those before," he said through his laughter and stepped close to Emily. The girl instantly blushed, not knowing if she could even take a couple steps away from him. The master's son came so close that Emily could feel the fabric of his developing shirt with her hand. "Emily, that's your name, isn't it? Did Mia say it right?" he asked with a playful smile. "Yes, that's correct." She looked up at him again. "Now, Emily, the master of the house isn't coming here for the simple reason that he's already standing in front of you. I'm Harry." Emily both stood and froze with her mouth open in amazement. The young man, however, moved his glasses back over his eyes without another word, and then strode away with a smooth gait toward the stairs leading to his private wing. Without turning around, he tossed her a final glance. "I like you, Emily. You are now definitely accepted. Please tell Mia that, and also ask her to drop in on me when she has a spare moment." With those words, he disappeared, leaving Emily in a semi-conscious state of excitement. Emily told her landlady that her master was waiting for her. She pressed her lips together and escorted the girl into the back room, where she gave her all the clothes she needed, the key to her room, and said, "Remember, we rise at 0600 so no one will see or hear you. And no matter how embarrassing it may be to you, you must continue to do your job. Do you understand?" "Understood," Emily muttered, thoroughly embarrassed, and went to change into her room. And so the girl's workday began. Very soon Emily realized what Mia meant when she talked about Harry's whims. It turned out that he loved to organize magnificent masquerade parties with a lot of music, beautiful women, and exquisite drinks. Besides Emily herself, there were about 15 other people working in the house, and they all acted as if they were mute and invisible objects in the mansion. It was certainly unusual for the girl to see all the house staff avoiding attention, as if they were walking underwater, avoiding the shaking in a quiet pond. But Harry had made it clear that he was open to interacting with them like normal people. Mia, however, continued her strict rules of behavior, even after her master had invited her in for a chat. Emily couldn't do anything about it. She was paid a substantial advance in her first month of work, some of which she immediately transferred to her parents. Harry, however, remained a mystery to her. He could suddenly walk up and kiss one of the young ladies who worked in his park. They were twin sisters, and they tended the beautiful conservatory, but at the same time he never allowed himself any unnecessary liberties with her or them. On such occasions he had more experienced ladies to whom he assigned the role of mistresses. Among his constant companions, Sophie was particularly prominent. The red-haired beauty with long legs spent most of her time by Harry's side. In turn, he called her bride more and more often. From this, the entire staff of the house concluded that it is not far off the time when these young people will get married and the owner will have an official wife. However, there was another side to this eccentric rich man. Very often, especially in the evening, Emily saw a young man immersed in the affairs of his company. He spent hours on his papers, and sometimes Emily was sure that he was working all night long. At the same time, she had never heard him say a rude word to anyone in the household. What if one of the workers made serious mistakes? Then Harry always talked to him alone, in his office, without prying eyes. But his fiancée, Sophie, did not share this peaceful approach to the staff at all. She had a tendency to pick on the little things, to raise her voice at everyone around her, and especially at the young maids, including Emily, whom she often brought to tears. "Why are you hanging around here?" During working hours, she yelled at the girls. "Don't you have anything else to do? Look around: dust, dirt, carpets not vacuumed. And you at least take up your work, you idle ones. When Harry and I get married, I'll teach you how to do things. Mia's taught you so much, and you just don't listen. Look me in the eye when I'm talking." Sophie was like a tigress to the workers, already seeing herself as the full mistress of the house. The maids could barely contain themselves, trying somehow to endure her screams and shrieks. God forbid Harry should really marry that Sophie, one of the maids complained in the kitchen. It won't be long before we're all finished, she added. What on earth can she do to you? Emily asked with a smile. It's not like she's his wife yet. You're worrying for nothing. Lily looked at Emily and said with bitterness in her voice, you just don't know her. Emily, she's not a woman. She's the epitome of jealousy and greed, only in high heels. And she'll fire us all. You bet she will. I mean, she's jealous of the owner of every plate. The other day she complained that we're too pretty, walking around the house and mollycoddling every little thing with our smiles, said Lily. Both girls, Lily and Emily, laughed amicably, realizing perfectly well how absurd the situation was. Especially when it came to someone like their master. I really need this job, Lily continued sadly. I have a young son staying in the village with my mom. I work here and send them money to keep him fed and clothed. I understand, Emily responded. I have parents in another town myself, always lived modestly. So this place is a real shot in the arm for me. Lily looked out the window at the full moon hanging over the horizon and smiled dreamily. Harry is very nice to us, she whispered, as if in confidence. He has his oddities, of course, but he's not at all as cruel as Mia says he is. I suspect that's the image she's given him among us, to make us work harder and not relax. He does seem a little odd, Emily agreed, trying not to meet Lily's gaze lest she read in it the feelings Emily felt every time she remembered how close Dmitri Petrovich stood to her. And he's so young to own such a huge company. How did he accomplish all this? Emily asked. Well, he inherited it 3 years ago, replied Lily simply. He's had these oddities ever since the motorcades, the working tirelessly, strange habits. Really, Emily was genuinely surprised. Well, yes, his father poisoned right at one of the business dinners. The police have never been able to figure out exactly who committed the crime. It's safe to say that the culprit is still at large, and Harry is very afraid that he might be the next victim. Emily was shocked. She couldn't even imagine that such a tragedy had occurred in the life of this seemingly so carefree and cheerful man. I think, Lily continued, that all these parties and fancies, like why he always takes our cook Alfie and one of the maids with him when he goes on business trips, are ways to distract himself from his personal drama. Harry loved his father dearly and apparently still can't come to terms with his loss, and his father's killers were never punished. Yes, it all seems to have affected him deeply, Emily said thoughtfully to herself. Who would have thought that rich people could have more serious problems than ordinary people? That night, for some reason, Emily couldn't sleep. Despite all her apparent prosperity, she kept thinking about Harry. What was he really like? Perhaps his whole image was nothing more than a mask that hid a more vulnerable and needy person. A few weeks later, what Lily was talking about happened. Harry was going on an important business trip and, as usual, had chosen his own company, his cook, Alfie, and his maid. To her great amazement, the latter turned out to be Emily herself. What surprises you so much? Harry asked with a slight chuckle. I need someone I can trust completely. Someone who will keep an eye on the cleanliness of my room and what I eat during the trip. Sounds like nothing special to me. Yes, but you don't know me at all, Emily objected. It's not like I've been working for you guys that long. What if I can't handle it? The young man's face took on a serious expression, and then he answered in a voice that sent shivers down Emily's spine. Well, if you can't handle it, then you and I will have to part ways. Or we can do it right now, if you're not confident in your abilities. Especially since this is a business trip for you. No, of course not. Of course I'll go with you, Emily said with her lips pressed together. And how could she think this businessman could have a heart? If Lily was right about his worries over her father's death, he was either hiding them very well, or her friend was simply mistaken. How could a man willing to fire another man in 2 seconds have deep emotions? No, Emily shook her head as she walked out of the supervisor's office. Harry could be anything he wanted to be, but definitely not a man who was suffering and in need of comfort. When all their belongings were packed and Emily and Alfie were getting into one of the 2 large jeeps, she didn't yet know what lay ahead. In one jeep, she and the cook were riding in, and in the second jeep was Harry himself and his guard. Oh, don't you worry so much, my dear Emily, Alfie said to Emily with a kind smile. It's not the first year I've traveled like this with my master. and it's always been fine. It's only for a couple days, nothing to worry about." Emily answered the cook with a calm but detached smile. An uneasy feeling of foreboding still lived inside her. Glancing up at the upper windows of the mansion, she thought she saw a familiar silhouette flashed in Harry's study. For a tiny fraction of an instant, Emily thought she saw someone's fiery red hair in the window. But it simply couldn't be true. Sophie had left the other day for some overseas resort and wasn't due back for another week at the earliest. "It's probably all your imagination," Emily said to herself. "You should read less detective stories at night." With these thoughts, the girl got into the car. At first the road was smooth, and the way through the lush forest seemed to her even picturesque. But the closer they got to the wide stone bridge, the more bumps were encountered along the way. "The road here hasn't been repaired in a long time. You have to be especially careful here," Emily's driver explained. "You don't have to explain," the girl nodded, remembering her father's tragedy. The driver wanted to add something else, but suddenly his attention was drawn to what was happening up ahead. Harry's car, which had always been considered one of the most reliable, suddenly started zigzagging down the road. "What the hell is going on up there?" the driver barely had time to utter when the car that was ahead uncontrollably crashed uncontrollably into the bridge railing and fell noisily into the water. Harry cried out, Emily in horror. And at the same instant their car began to repeat the leader's dangerous maneuvers. "What happened?" asked Alfie in lostness, whose eyes expressed great consternation. "Don't jinx it," Alfie shouted the driver, trying convulsively to hold the wheel. "I had a full inspection last week, didn't I? What the?" He didn't have time to finish his sentence because their Jeep, unable to slow down, followed the example of the boss's car and plummeted into the river wave with a crash. Emily couldn't remember exactly how she'd gotten underwater, just a protective reflex, and the girl opened her eyes, being already several meters submerged in the deep abyss. The cabin was completely flooded. This she realized at once. Next to her, with his eyes wide open, sat Alfie. Blood was oozing from a wound on his temple, and Emily realized bitterly that the poor man had evidently been struck when the car fell. He was as dead as the driver, who almost immediately choked to death from the powerful torrent of water. Being an excellent runner, Emily had good lung capacity, so she managed to get out of the Jeep fairly quickly. She looked, trying to find the second car in the murky water. Finally, she saw Harry's car was buried up to its hood in the mud, sinking to the bottom of the river. After a few more meters, she saw Harry, or rather, his arms floating in the water, for which she grabbed him and began dragging him upward, away from the flooded car. With great difficulty, Emily managed not only to pull her boss up, but also to drag him to the shore, and from there to the nearest road. There, Emily was able to stop the first car she could find and call an ambulance. Until the medics arrived, the girl gave the victim all the necessary in such cases a set of resuscitation measures. She, still on the shore, felt Harry's pulse, and making sure that he was alive, tried to pump out most of the water from his lungs. Although enough water was pumped out of the man, he never regained consciousness. Because of this, Emily had to literally carry him on her back to the nearest highway. Emily's lungs burned as if they were on fire. The girl's legs were shaking under her coughing, but she was determined to save Harry. When the ambulance finally arrived, Emily described the whole situation to them, and the paramedics guessed that there was something fishy going on. They called the police too. Emily and Harry were taken to the hospital, where they were given all the proper care. Since the girl was barely hurt, she was able to visit Harry after a few long hours that seemed like an eternity. The man, by then already recovered, thanked the girl profusely. "You said you couldn't handle it," he said in a hoarse voice. "You didn't just handle it, you kept me alive. And I can imagine what you had to go through while you dragged me through those woods. I'm sorry, Emily. I'm ashamed of myself for the way I pointed out your place." "Come on," Harry, Emily said. "The important thing is that you're breathing. My teachers at school told me I had a talent for running. I'm finally getting the hang of it. If I didn't run so much, I wouldn't be able to get you out." "Except what? My co-workers?" Harry asked her gloomily. "They're all dead," Emily said with a heavy heart. Harry nodded understandingly. I don't understand what happened at all. The cars were in perfect working order. Of that I'm sure, Emily. Harry glared at his young savior. What's the matter, alarmed? Are you ill? Shall I call a doctor? No, Harry stopped her. No, it's not that. The young man reached into his jacket hanging on the chair and pulled a thick notebook out of the pocket, with a bordered uniform cover, inside of which was already a pre-prepared pen. Here. He wrote something on a tiny scrap of paper, ripped it off, and handed it to Emily. Now you're the only one I can trust. Emily, not understanding anything, took the paper from his hands. There were some numbers written on it, and the girl counted 10 of them. But what are they? She asked. It's a code. Don't worry. It's not for the safe, Harry joked. It's just for my work laptop. The computer is in my office, and I have an unusual favor to ask of you. Please. It will help me understand and solve a lot of things. Emily nodded, and after listening to her superior's request, she drove back home. An investigator came into Harry's room to question him about what had happened. The policeman assured the victim that they would do everything they could to find the perpetrators. The perpetrators. Harry couldn't believe his ears. Did that mean it wasn't a simple accident? I'm afraid not, the policeman shook his head. We've brought the cars up to the surface, and the preliminary examination leaves no room for comfort. Someone deliberately damaged your brake hoses, knowing that you would be driving in difficult road conditions. After saying these words, Harry slowly leaned back against the pillow. The realization that he was being chased made it hard for him to breathe. Your competitors, the policeman clarified. Forgive my impudence, but I'm aware of your father's case. As far as I know, they never found the culprits. Harry nodded briefly. I think it was the same people, he said faintly, suppressing the same sense of fear he'd tried to drown out with alcohol over the years. At the same moment, Emily arrived at Harry's mansion and went up to his office, trying to be inconspicuous. She realized that her arrival had probably already been recorded by security, but she hoped for protection from Harry if security started asking questions. Emily turned on Harry's laptop and entered the password, which was 10 digits long. Immediately after entering the password, she accessed the desktop and opened the folder with the security footage. Selecting the desired date, she waited for the desired video to load. On the footage, she saw two people enter the garage, a red-haired woman in expensive shoes and the head of security, whose job it was to protect Harry. They looked around and then damaged the brake hoses of the cars they planned to drive in. This discovery could significantly change the direction of the investigation, and Emily knew she needed to report everything to Harry. After watching the tape, an even more repulsive scene followed. A red-haired woman, whom Emily identified as Sophie, kissed her accomplice, after which both quietly left the garage. Emily urgently copied the video to a flash drive, closed and shut down her computer, and only then reported it to the police. When the investigators and SWAT team arrived at the mansion, the head of security was already packing his things, intending to flee abroad with Sophie. However, Sophie, convinced of Harry's death, decided to take all the treasures alone. She was apprehended at the airport as she tried to leave the country. The investigation revealed that Sophie was working for the same people behind the murder of Harry's father. Although Sophie did not personally kill anyone, she was promised a large percentage of the younger Harry's fortune if he died. She seduced the head of security and convinced him to arrange an accident for Harry. Now Sophie and the security chief faced the prospect of a lengthy imprisonment. In doing so, Sophie betrayed her former masters by agreeing to a plea bargain in exchange for a reduction in her own sentence. Her security lover will receive the maximum sentence. For complicity in the elimination of Harry's father to the heads of a rival company quickly enough got through the police, thanks to Sophie's confession. These turned out to be his father's longtime adversaries who wanted to take over his empire. Coming out of the hospital, Harry realized many things and changed his approach to life. He left empty parties and got rid of irrational rules in business. He gave his former fiancée Sophie a resignation and instead hired someone with the kindest heart, who easily found a common language with his staff and managed Harry's property without any confusion. Emily continued her work at the house, but she and Harry were now very close friends. Their shared story of saving his life brought them together, and that was just the beginning. 15 years later, the parking lot in front of the school, where Emily once attended, was extremely crowded. The parking lot was packed with cars down to the last space. So many people wanted to see each other again. After all, they had once all been classmates. Amelia had become much more lush and rounded than before. Whereas in her youth her fullness had seemed a nice addition to her charming appearance, now it clearly indicated a serious decline in her health, which Amelia apparently either ignored or denied. She barely fit in her thin, sparkling dress, apparently expecting rapturous shouts of admiration from her old school friends. But even those who had admired Amelia during her school days, and those who had only pretended to please her, were unable to appreciate her outfit on a decent level. This time, the excessive folds on her clothes made her look like something far less graceful. At that time, a large black limousine, sparkling with cleanliness, pulled up to the school building. Everyone in the auditorium, busily devouring salted pretzels, immediately rushed to the window. They were mesmerized by the intrigue who had arrived in such a luxurious car. When the car doors swung open to reveal the luxurious interior, the first to step out was a foot elegantly shod in soft suede boots. She was followed by a young and beautiful woman. Her slender figure possessed the healthy glow of youth, and the modest smile on her face involuntarily attracted stares like a magnet. "What's going on over there? What are you all staring at?" Amelia said impatiently. Pushing through the crowd and looking out the window, the woman ahed loudly, and then her face contorted with envy and anger. A few minutes later, Emily entered the hall, beautiful and blooming. Her classmates, dumbfounded, gazed at her gorgeous outfit, neatly styled hair, and discreet but high-quality makeup. No one could even imagine that Emily, who had been bullied during her school years, would not only retain her natural beauty and charm, but would turn into the most successful woman among them all. "Well, hello, Emily," Amelia shouted, extending her hand. "Not bad, you are so well settled. And how much do you pay the beautician? Or all in the old-fashioned way, cucumber?" Emily wasn't confused. "Hi, Amelia," she said calmly. "I just came by for a few minutes to see you all. Take another look at my past. And one last time to make sure I hadn't lost anything." Emily moved closer to Amelia and pointed to her neck. "You know, Amelia, you haven't changed one bit," Emily continued, enjoying the effect her words had on her teacher. "You're still just as naive and your jokes are just as tasteless." With those words, Emily looked Amelia over from head to toe and took one last look at the crowd of classmates, who seemed dull and lifeless, like peacocks that had lost their luster. Under the weight of anger, boredom, and time passed, she slowly made her way toward the exit, and before she left, she said, "You see, life always knows who has done how much good and evil. Someone dares to follow his star and gets a chance to become one of its rays, and someone remains empty, though shiny on the outside. A wrapper from which all the foil, alas, crumbles with time. Happy life to all of you," Emily said, walking down to the school doors. The classmates immediately turned around and looked back at the window. Harry stepped out of the car that was waiting for Emily outside, still as tall and stately as ever, but now wearing a pair of elegant glasses on the bridge of his nose. He was followed by two children, a boy about 12 years old and a girl about 4 years younger. The children threw themselves into Emily's arms excitedly, and Harry smiled, patting them on the head affectionately. Emily turned, and Harry gave her a long, full kiss, full of tenderness and love. After everything that had happened with the car falling into the river, he suddenly realized how different Emily was from all the women in his past. She was steadfast and undaunted, but at the same time gentle and modest, as beautiful as the most exquisite rose. She gave him everything he had dreamed of and more. When he proposed to her, she said yes, and it became the happiest day of his life. And 6 months after the wedding, when Emily announced that they were expecting a baby, Harry felt like he was finally not alone. Now they both had a chance to live the life they deserved, and no obstacles in the world could stop them. As their car drove away from the school, Amelia stayed inside the building. Emily didn't see Amelia throwing tantrums after they left, tearing her false hair out and cursing everything in the world, unable to understand why it was that Emily the daughter of the school janitor, was able to achieve everything in life that Amelia thought should be hers. All she had was money, which never brought her happiness, and an alcoholic husband who married her only for a good place in her father's company. Time had not spared Amelia, and life had not added to her wisdom. All this she realized now, when it became obvious to her that it was probably too late to change anything. But it is so often the case that people only come to certain conclusions when circumstances no longer make them easy to apply. As she stood in the empty hall, maybe for the first time she thought seriously about her life, about its real values, and the opportunities she'd missed by being trapped in her illusions and chasing the wrong priorities.
"Daddy, I got first place." Andrew smiled. This is Hannah, the daughter. In her 15 years of life, she had given her father many reasons to be proud of herself. Just now, the little girl had called her parent to report another victory. She was in Canada at another Olympiad for young programmers. Hannah went there as part of a group from the Center for Gifted Children, where she had been studying for 4 years. "Congratulations." "My good girl," the man said. "I owe you a present. I'm so excited." Hannah's voice shook with excitement. She cared a lot about this contest. Hannah had already decided on a profession for about 5 years. She would be a computer programmer, and she would definitely go to Harvard University. There are so many opportunities for young professionals in Cambridge. Not like in their provincial town. Hannah was already getting crowded here, but to get into such a prestigious university, you need to win all American and international competitions. So Hannah did her best. "Get some rest now." Andrew told his daughter, "Take a walk around Cambridge, now that you're in such a beautiful city. Just be careful out there." "Yes, Daddy, of course, I love you." Hannah pressed reset. A short beep sounded in the receiver. Andrew smiled again. Hannah was so smart, so intelligent, so sensible, so much more intelligent than he was. At her age, her daughter will accomplish a lot. And just 9 or 10 years ago, Andrew was looking for information about schools for children with everything was going to give her to the 1st grade in a remedial educational institution. In a regular school, and certainly in the gymnasium or lyceum, she would not be taken because in his 6 years the girl did not speak a word, mooing. Sometimes something or gestures explained if she needed something urgently. But this rarely happened. Most often the daughter was in her own thoughts, sitting on the windowsill in the nursery. It was her favorite, looking out the window and thinking about something. Hannah hardly smiled at all during that period. Andrew didn't immediately notice that something was wrong with his daughter. Too preoccupied with his own grief. And Hannah, what could Hannah possibly understand? She was only 2 years old. She probably didn't even remember Alice, her mom. That's what Andrew thought. But the disappearance of her mother from her 2-year-old's life had taken a serious toll on her. That's what we found out later. The consequences were catastrophic. Every time Hannah had another success, Andrew was happy, rejoicing. I can see why. But sadness came from the fact that Alice couldn't. She would have been happy to know that her favorite long-awaited daughter was growing up so smart. But that's just the way it turned out. Andrew grew up in a wealthy family and was an only child. What's more, even his grandparents had him as their only grandchild. It is not difficult to assume that from an early age, Andrew grew up in love, recognition, and attention of loved ones. He had everything he needed to be happy. Beautiful clothes, expensive toys. He was taken to expensive resorts. Delicious pancakes and fragrant pies were prepared for him on demand. Andrew received detailed answers to all his questions, and at any moment he could play with one of his relatives on the table, for example, or in the ball. He was never refused. The relatives adored Andrew, and he reciprocated them. It is a blessing to have such a strong, friendly family, where everyone is ready to support the other in any situation. When Andrew became older, he had to study a lot. In prestigious language gymnasiums, a lot of lessons were assigned. And additionally, the boy was engaged in several sections: swimming, boxing, financial literacy, business school, all because he was to become the heir to his father's mini empire. So the parent called the network of pizzerias, the owner of which was. Business steadily brought good profits and grew, developed. Even branches in other cities opened. Andrew, since childhood, delved into the intricacies of the family business. His father often took him with him to the office, showed his very young son financial documents. in general, actively preparing his own replacement. "I don't know what will happen to me." "You must be ready to be at the helm at any moment," his father said. "True," he'd add, "but I hope, of course, to remain in charge for a long time to come. And in any case, I need a worthy assistant. Pretty soon you'll be my right-hand man." Andrew didn't mind. He liked his father's business, liked to get into the nuances of his business. And the young boy sometimes had quite worthwhile ideas, which his father praised very much and put into practice. Andrew enjoyed seeing his parents' eyes light up with pride for his only son. Then Andrew went to study in New York, entered the Faculty of Economics. Not really. His father himself connected some of his connections, but Andrew studied completely independently and was one of the best students of the course. Capital life fascinated the guy. It was bright, rich, diverse, full of adventures and new acquaintances. But New York is tiring. It is good to come to have fun, to get new impressions, but it's also great to study here, of course. Where else can you find such a cluster of talented teachers, theorists, and practitioners who have achieved dizzying success? But by the last year, Andrew realized that his destiny is to live in his native small town, quiet, calm, cozy. There's no rush. The road to the office takes a maximum of 20 minutes, and that's if you get into traffic. And in general, the hometown has its own special atmosphere. It gives strength and confidence. Anyway, Andrew decided to return to his hometown, especially since his father needed his right hand. But Andrew knew that if he wanted to stay in New York, his parents would not have pressured or opposed him. They'd support their son anyway, and it's just great to have such a solid backing behind him. Anyway, Andrew came to town and got to work. Together with his father, they thought of a new project to open a Japanese restaurant. In the end, everything worked out, but not immediately, but after almost 5 years. For a while about the project had to forget, as in Andrew's life began to happen important events one after another. And then at one time this restaurant practically saved a man's life, distracted him, shifted his attention, and helped him get away from destructive thoughts. But that's all later. Anyway, one December afternoon, Andrew decided that it was time for him to unwind. He called his former classmate Alex, and the friends went to the skating rink. Just like in the good old days, the skating rink was big. It was located in the central square of the city. Music was playing loudly, and people of all ages and builds were gliding along the ice. Snow was falling from the sky in large flakes. In the center of the rink rose a 3-meter-high dressed Christmas tree. Christmas was coming soon, Andrew's favorite holiday since childhood. So far, his parents have made him a sweet gift collected in a beautiful bag with Santa Claus' favorite candy of their already 25-year-old son. Andrew was genuinely happy about the surprise every time. So warmly became on a soul at once memories and happy childhood in a head surfaced. Andrew was confident on skates. When he was a kid, he and Alex had managed to go to the hockey section for 2 years. Then both of them didn't have time for sports. They started serious studies. But the skills haven't gone away. Here he is, Alex, already at the other end of the rink, trying to meet girls. Andrew grinned. His buddy wouldn't miss a single hottie. He'd never miss a girl like that. Andrew stared at his friend. And that's why the girl in white down jacket and light jeans probably didn't notice her right away. So fragile, almost transparent. And he, a big guy, came at her and, of course, knocked her down. The young men exclaimed at the same time. Andrew suddenly felt his cheeks blush. He had pushed a man. The boy hastily gave the stranger a hand, helped her up, and she apologized. Andrew couldn't believe his ears. It would be more logical to hear the girl's indignant exclamation. Not that sorry. I only recently started to skate. In general, I don't know how to skate well. Bumping into everyone here. Andrew looked into the girl's wide-open blue eyes and realized that he didn't want to let go of her hand. Though the girl had been standing on her feet for a long time, and she obviously didn't need his help anymore. Long auburn strands of hair stood out from under a white-colored down jacket, and the girl's cheeks drooped sharply from the frost. She looked so beautiful, so young, so touching that the guy couldn't take his eyes off her. Maybe, if you don't mind, I'll give you a lesson. Teach you how to skate. Get better at staying on the ice. That would be just fine. Individual coaching is something I never dreamed of, but this is exactly that's how Andrew met his future wife. Only at the time, Of course, he didn't know it yet. He didn't even think about it. He just enjoyed talking to a beautiful girl. So, looking like a snow maiden in that white jacket of hers, they then skated for a long time. Alex had long since left the rink. Andrew and Alice still didn't want to part. They talked about everything that day. They talked about all kinds of things, as if they had known each other for 100 years. Andrew marveled at how much they matched in everything. Of course, the young people exchanged phone numbers and started dating. Andrew knew, of course, about his father's plans for his only son's personal life. The parent wanted the guy to marry Megan, the daughter of a local entrepreneur and business partner. Then the financial whizzes would combine their empires into something grand. Megan was a pretty good girl. Andrew's age, serious, career-oriented. She was also preparing to become her father's right-hand woman. Andrew had even been okay with being her spouse at first. Why not? A worthy option. But Alice was from a middle-class or even poor family. 36, it's a very thin line. Alice lived with her parents and 2 younger brothers in a 1-bedroom apartment. She didn't starve. She didn't wear socks. She even graduated from a local university. But the family couldn't afford many things. For example, they never traveled or dined in restaurants. That is, the financial levels of Alice and Andrew were very different. The girl was a little stressed, but the guy didn't care. He dreamed of showing Alice the whole world, to make her life bright, happy, and carefree. Andrew truly fell in love and felt that it was mutual. The guy realized that his parents would not be delighted with this choice. They had warned him so many times at first, and girls dreaming of hooking a boy from a wealthy family. Mercantile ladies planning to move into a beautiful life on the hump of a man in love with them did exist. Andrew knew it. He'd even met such, and more than once. But the piranha girl's intentions were very obvious. How could they not try to hide it? And Andrew was sure that his mother and father, having gotten to know Alice better, would understand and accept his son's choice. Even if they didn't, Andrew didn't care about his parents' opinion as long as he was close to his beloved. Saw her deep blue eyes, heard her gentle voice, and felt her resting her head on his shoulder. This gesture, for some reason, especially pleases the guy. And so it came to pass. Alice was very afraid to meet Andrew's parents. But it was impossible to postpone. The guy made her favorite proposal. No matter how hard you look at it, you'll have to meet new relatives. The acquaintance went just fine. As Andrew expected, the charming bride conquered the hearts of his mother and father. It couldn't have been otherwise. Andrew, of course, met with the parents of his future wife and was surprised to note that Alice's father clearly abuses alcohol. It was noticeable in his eyes, skin color, trembling hands. The girl's mother, on the other hand, looked pale and haggard. Apparently, she had to carry the whole family on her own. Andrew felt sorry for her. Alice had never told Andrew about her father before. She was embarrassed, I guess. But did she really think it would change his attitude toward her? How could Alice have thought that? Anyway, seeing the conditions in which his beloved lived, Andrew was even more firmly rooted in the decision to take her away from there to a new life. Then the wedding was lavish, loud, joyous. Alice looked like a fairy tale princess in her wedding dress. Andrew couldn't take his eyes off her. And he wasn't the only one. The bride received many compliments from all the guests, but Alice didn't know how to accept them. She was embarrassed. But it felt good. Andrew and Alice began to live in her husband's apartment. The guy had long ago settled in his own den. He only came to visit his parents. Those were wonderful days. Alice was getting used to a new home, to a new life. The newlyweds were learning to live together. Adult relatives warned that the process of fitting in usually does not go as smoothly as one would like. Conflicts, arguments, quarrels are inevitable. But in the case of Alice and Andrew, none of that happened. Young spouses as if they were made for each other. Andrew every day mentally thanked fate that she brought him and Alice together. He could not believe that they were so much alike, loving the same movies and books, looking at things the same way. They even said the same things for each other sometimes. Alice worked as a notary assistant in a local office. Andrew ran a business with his father. Love, understanding, a full house. It seemed that only cloudless happiness awaited the newlyweds. So it was for some time, about a year after the wedding, Alice told her husband that she was expecting a child. The joy of the future father had no limit. They had already been planning a baby for 6 months. but in no way it worked out. The newlyweds were going to doctors to apply, waited for Alice's vacation, tuned in for a long systematic search for the problem. And here it is, happiness. Everything worked out. The pregnancy was not very easy. Alice was constantly vomiting. She was repeatedly laid down on the ward. Toward the end of the pregnancy, she was diagnosed with heart problems. It's like she didn't have them before, or they didn't show up. And then the body, barely manifested with the increased load, gave a sudden failure. Andrew's parents found the best doctors for Alice. She was under constant observation. Andrew was painful to see his beloved in such a state, and from fear for her, he anxiously clenched his heart. Fortunately, everything went well. In due time, Alice gave birth to a big, strong girl. At the family council, it was decided to name the baby Hannah. Andrew was happy. The baby was doing well. Alice was also on the mend after the birth, and the young mother's recovery was well underway, as evidenced by numerous examinations. Alice recovered quickly and happily plunged into caring for her daughter. Andrew also did not stay aside, trying to enjoy to the fullest the infancy of his long-awaited child. The man realized that the second baby in their family will no longer be. Doctors made it clear that Alice is contraindicated in pregnancy. She barely survived this time too. According to the cardiologist, the young woman was just lucky. Andrew, he wasn't ready to risk the most precious thing in his life, and one child is enough for them. He is also in the family alone and from nothing. Hannah turned out to be just what they needed. Healthy, smart, funny, agile, and quick. As soon as the daughter began to walk, immediately learned to climb into the most unexpected places, then in the closet with clothes her parents found her, or in the toy box. An eye on her. Hannah immediately became a favorite of numerous relatives, parents, grandparents. Grown-ups loved the girl, often visited her, gave her gifts. Andrew's mother was especially pleased with her granddaughter. Finally, I have someone to buy dresses, and that all these shorts and sneakers bored already. Sooner the girl's hair industry. I want to braid her hair. A year and a half passed. Hannah was already starting to talk. Alice devoted all her time to her daughter, singing her songs, telling her poems, practicing gymnastics with the little girl. And the results were visible. The girl in her 1.5 years quite clearly spoke in sentences. Of course, with a baby, where without it. But the adults understood her perfectly. Andrew's heart clenched with tenderness when his little girl addressed him. The man felt that for the sake of his daughter and his wife, he could move mountains. They were so happy. But at least Andrew thought so. But Alice once surprised him very much, saying that she was happy, of course, but still not quite. It turned out that Alice had dreamed of having another child. Hannah grew up, and the young mother, looking at the little girl, regretted that the girl would have to grow up alone. You see, I have 2 brothers, don't I? It's so great. We were never bored. We ran everywhere together, played, talked a lot about everything in the world, stood for each other. But the girl is all alone. That's not good. But I grew up alone in a family too, said Andrew with a smile. I had a pretty happy childhood too. You just don't know what you've been deprived of. Alice shook her head and sighed sadly. Andrew felt uneasy. He didn't like this talk. You know, it's dangerous for you to give birth again. Remember how hard Hannah was on us? You were on the brink so many times, but we didn't know then, but now we do, and we realize it's very dangerous. We've had enough of Hannah. That's exactly what we know, Alice exclaimed. I'm going to see a cardiologist. I'm going to take all the right medications. And I've prepared for pregnancy. I'm taking the right vitamins. I'm already taking them. I read a lot about such cases. If you keep everything under control, the risk is minimal. I'm so looking forward to having another baby. Andrew was adamant. He and Alice even had their first fight about it. His wife convinced him that everything would be fine. It was only necessary to follow the doctor's orders, to be constantly monitored by specialists, and she was ready to do it for the sake of a second. But the man could not risk Alice's life. Of course, he would like a big family, several children, but not at the same price. It was foolish to test fate again, given their recent experience. And yet it happened. Alice had informed Andrew on a sunny July morning that they were having a second baby boy. The man was truly terrified then. He probably even turned pale. Alice laughed and put her hand on his shoulder. What's the matter with you? Everything will be fine, you'll see. Andrew only shook his head. He knew felt that nothing was going to be okay anymore. The pregnancy, strangely enough, was much easier than the first time. Alice was feeling well. She was walking a lot. She followed all the doctor's recommendations and was examined very often. She literally never left the hospital. Although her condition was quite favorable, everything seemed to be in order. But Andrew's soul was not calm, and for good reason. It happened in the night, suddenly nothing that did not portend trouble. Andrew woke up to quiet sounds. Alice wasn't well, so bad that she couldn't even call for help. Alice was gasping for breath. Andrew jumped up, turned on the light, and was horrified. He had never seen his wife so pale, black circles under her eyes, white skin. Her chest heaved heavily. The woman was short of breath. Andrew grabbed the phone in a panic and called an ambulance. Then he called his mother to have her and his father come over and sit with Hannah. The baby was sleeping sweetly in her princess room and didn't even realize anything scary was going on. Andrew held Alice's cold hand, confessed his love to her, asked her to hold on, and prayed. For the first time in his life, he prayed to himself that the doctors would make it in time. It seemed to him that when help arrived, it would be too late, and that thought made Andrew panic. The doctors arrived in time, several uniformed men, and they made their way to the bedroom. Alice was given an ACG. Her blood pressure was taken. She was listened to. Then they injected her with something. The woman seemed to feel better. At least, she was breathing more freely. Andrew exhaled. Everything's going to be okay now. His parents came over to babysit Hannah. So Andrew calmly followed the ambulance, where at the same time the paramedics were fighting for his wife's life. They should be able to handle it. They're professionals. Everything will be all right. Andrew convinced himself on the way. But reaching the hospital, the man learned the terrible news. Alice was not brought. She was gone in the ambulance. The doctors did everything they could. Pregnancy, which Andrew was so afraid of, still finished his wife. The baby couldn't be saved either. For a month, the man withdrew into himself. He was not interested in anything, neither business nor his own health, not even his young daughter. He blamed himself for not changing Alice's mind, not forcing her to abort. Of course he was to blame for everything that had happened. He should have been a more attentive and sensitive husband. He failed to protect his happiness. Life without Alice made no sense. They had so many plans, so many desires together. And now Andrew was feeling sorry for himself. Who else would understand him like that? As a spouse, who would love him like that? She still hadn't seen all those corners of the planet that Andrew had promised to show her. She didn't get to enjoy her life. Mother and father tried to pull their son out of the depths of despair. They brought therapists and psychologists to him who had life-saving conversations with the man of the soul. Sometimes it did make things easier, but only for a while. Andrew didn't understand why he had to live. The strangest scary thing was that he didn't even want to see Hannah. Does the girl miss you? His mother tried to get through to her son. Not only did her mom die, but her father disappeared from her life. Imagine what it's like for a child. Andrew didn't want to imagine anything. He didn't care. And anyway, what could a little girl who wasn't even 2 years old understand? He'd probably already forgotten Alice and Hannah. But her mother insisted that Hannah was not well. She doesn't talk to anyone else, and she doesn't smile. Remember what a little girl we used to have. Now she sits around all day rearranging cubes. It's a terrible sight. No one can get her to shake it up. What if you can do it? It was only 6 months after the tragedy that Andrew began to come back to life. Parents, friends, and doctors helped. And of course, too, the man started working again. And then just his father offered him to develop the very project, which for a while was forgotten, a Japanese restaurant. Andrew gladly seized the opportunity to distract himself for a little while. It's a huge project. It's a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of work to get to market. That's good. Let his head be filled with familiar things rather than destruct. That's when the man visited his daughter for the first time in a long time. Andrew felt guilty in front of the little girl. It was as if he betrayed her, abandoned her, left her to her parents. After all, the mother was right. Hannah has really experienced a huge tragedy. And even if she doesn't realize it as an adult, she feels the tragedy on the level of feelings. Alice and Hannah, they were so close. She followed her mother around like a tail, even climbed into bed with her. At night, she'd lie on her lap. They were never apart for more than a couple hours. And then all of a sudden, this happened. Andrew barely recognized his daughter. Of course, he realized that children grow up fast at that age. She was barely 2 years old when the tragedy happened, and now she's 2.5. But the blue eyes in the framed, long, upward curved dark lashes looked at him too mature. The Hannah's indeed had become quiet and sad. She no longer ran around the house looking for adventure, no longer laughed, no longer even smiled. And worst of all, the little girl was silent before what had happened to Alice. Hannah spoke very well for her age. Familiar friends were surprised that it was a rarity, such a talkative baby. Her relatives were proud. That's how clever Hannah is. And now the girl said nothing at all, so moved sometimes something under his. Andrew was disturbed by this discovery. His mother, of course, had told him what was happening to Hannah, but he hadn't really listened then. He had been too caught up in his own grief. We are, of course, seeing everything at the doctor's. She's been examined. Physically, she is quite healthy. The doctors say everything will work out. She will talk. They were surprised at all why we are so worried. A lot of kids her age are still quiet, but they don't seem to really believe that Hannah used to talk. Thank you for taking care of my daughter. Andrew was indeed very grateful to his parents for taking over the care of his child. He himself was not able to take care of the baby. And after all, this baby has so much to eat. Oh no, we're happy about it. Hannah's very sweet. Andrew plunged headlong into his work. He slept overnight in the office, took care of all the financial reports, went into every detail. The restaurant opened even earlier than planned. And still Andrew was not satisfied. He wanted more, better. Andrew tried to get people from all over the city and even from other cities to come to the restaurant. With Hannah, he now, of course, he saw, but not every day. The girl continued to live with her grandparents. Andrew's mother was much engaged in her granddaughter and on the specialists she took her. And herself at home developed the little girl as she could. But there was no result. Hannah grew up, but never spoke. It pained Andrew to see his once cheerful little girl. It was as if she was still reeling from what had happened to Alice. Andrew, of course, was still worried too. He longed for Alice, continued to blame himself at times, despaired at not being able to hug the one he loved. But he's older and stronger. And then there's his job, Hannah. She cannot cope with her misfortune, and the specialists on which her adult relatives hope turned out to be powerless. Andrew, on the advice of doctors, bought a cozy country house with a large yard. On the territory arranged for Hannah a whole fairy tale park with fountains and swings, even her own little castle. And in the backyard for the baby, built a pool. Many doctors said that swimming has a beneficial effect on the nervous system of children. So Andrew took it upon himself to teach his daughter to swim. Hannah quickly realized what was going on. Now she spent summer days in the pool, swimming from side to side like a fish. But that didn't work either. Hannah did become more athletic, more resilient, which isn't a bad thing, of course. But she was still quiet and didn't really want to interact with the world around her. Andrew was taking care of his daughter now. It was his father's responsibility and duty to take care of his daughter. During the day with Hannah sat Nanny, because the little girl could not attend a regular kindergarten, and in the correctional, it did not want to give her. There are children with serious diagnoses and mental retardation. Hannah's not like that. She's very smart. Her eyes are alive, smart. She just doesn't talk. But it's daycare. Daycare is voluntary. You can take your kid, you can keep her at home. And Hannah's 6 already. School's just around the corner. If it goes on like this, we'll have to send her to a special school for children with special developmental needs. Andrew dreaded the thought. He knew that Hannah was capable of many things. She sees everything, notices and understands everything, but she keeps silent. She can't go to a remedial school. It would only make things worse. Only the doctors made it clear that there's no other way out. If a year of rehabilitation doesn't yield results, Hannah will be enrolled in a special school because she has to get an education anyway. Hannah, will you just say the word? Andrew pleaded with his daughter. You can, can't you? I know. The girl looked at her father with indifferent eyes and remained silent. And then went to her room, sat on her favorite wide windowsill, hugged her knees with her hands and thought about something known only to her. She could sit like that for hours that November evening. Andrew stayed late at the office. He warned Hannah's nanny and promised to reward her generously for her overtime hours. She didn't mind. She never minded babysitting Hannah for another hour. I've had a lot of children. Nanny shook her head. But this is the first time I've met one so quiet and unproblematic. It's a pleasure to sit with the girl. You can't see her, you can't hear her. Andrew, of course, was not pleased with such compliments to his daughter. It would already be better if Hannah, like other kids, asked 1,000,000 questions a minute and methodically trashed the entire house. But no, she sits on the windowsill looking off into the distance, calls for lunch, will come, eat, put the dishes away, does not call, and does not remember that it's time to eat. And so it is in everything. No initiative, no desire, except that the pool in the summer months gave the girl some pleasure. And even there, in the warm birch water, she didn't smile. So Andrew left the office late. It was almost 8 o'clock. On the way, the man remembered that Hannah's favorite cereal had run out at home. It would be a shame if she didn't get her usual product for breakfast. No, the little girl wouldn't make a scandal, wouldn't get cranky, and certainly wouldn't get hysterical. Hannah probably won't give away her disappointment in any way. In that sense, she really is a problem-free child. But Andrew wanted to please his daughter at least in small things. He carefully noticed what Hannah liked and tried to give her positive emotions more often. Andrew parked near a convenience store and got out of the warm interior of the car. It was already quite cold on a straight November evening. It was also slushy, dark, uncomfortable. His face was immediately frozen, icy wind. The man raised the collar of his jacket to protect his neck and cheeks from the merciless gusts. With a quick step, he headed for the doors of the supermarket. The doors obediently slid open, allowing the caller inside. Andrew found himself on the stairs leading up to the supermarket itself. It was already much warmer here than outside, but the dim bulb under the ceiling gave little light. There was dirt all over the floor. People were coming in. The cleaning lady had not yet had time to clean the not-too-cozy, pleasant place. The man was about to go up to the store when he noticed. A girl, a very young girl, in a thin coat that was soaked. She was sitting behind a column on the high curb that stretched along the wall. Andrew stopped. There was something about the girl's appearance that the man immediately realized she was in trouble. She needed help. Long blonde hair, windswept, thin hands shivering in the deep pockets of her coat, and the eyes, huge eyes of a marvelous shade of turquoise. Andrew seemed never to have seen such confused and sad eyes. He had to approach this stranger to find out what was wrong, or else he would scare her even more. After all, he was a man, and she, a fragile young girl, would probably be alarmed and think something bad. Andrew walked past. The supermarket was already sparsely populated. The man walked slowly through the rows. He put in the basket his daughter's favorite cereal, sausage and cheese, some fruit for himself. Then suddenly he saw a beautiful doll. She looked a lot like Hannah. Andrew smiled and put the pink box with the rest of his purchases. Maybe the toy would make her happy at least a little. Hannah hadn't laughed the whole time. Andrew thought about this girl, wondering if she would still be there when he left the store. The man hoped not, because the second time he would have to offer her help. Otherwise his conscience would get the better of him. And there was no telling what kind of story she had. I wouldn't want to get involved in anything, but Andrew's hopes were not realized. The girl was still sitting where she was. She gripped her shoulders with her hands, trying to stop the shivering. The stranger must have been freezing to the bone in her thin, wet coat. She must have been caught in the rain. It had rained just an hour and a half ago, a real deluge with hail of sorts. That's quite a situation. Andrew took a decisive step toward the girl and, trying to soften his tone as much as possible, asked her a question. "Are you all right?" The girl cast her wondering eyes down at him. There was clearly a look of surprise read in them, but yeah, sure. She's been sitting here for probably about an hour now, and Andrew was probably the first person to notice that she needed help. "It's okay," the stranger smiled. She turned out to have a very beautiful smile, genuine and kind. "I don't think you're telling me the truth," Andrew replied with a smile. "You see, when people are well, they don't sit alone in the supermarket shivering in the cold. Maybe you should call a cab. You obviously need to get home to warmth." "No, I'm at home." The girl lowered her head. "How?" Andrew wondered. His interlocutor didn't look homeless in any way. She looked well-groomed, and she was dressed well. "It's a long story. I'll be fine. I'll figure something out." Of course, after such an admission from a stranger, Andrew couldn't just walk away. He took a seat next to her on the curb and looked into her eyes. "You tell me a lot of time, so I'd love to hear your very long story." Andrew felt sorry for this young girl. What if someday his Hannah found herself in a difficult situation? She would need help and people would pass by indifferently. After all, this girl is someone's daughter too. Someone loves her, worries about her. All right, the stranger finally decided. "I guess I should introduce myself first. My name is Andrew," and Leslie began her story, which turned out to be a long one indeed. The girl grew up in the village in a large family. When the girl was 10 years old, her father died on a construction site, and the family began to face hard times. The head of the family used to fully provide for the family. By village standards, they lived very well. Their house, their own small household. The mother didn't work, was busy with the house and children. She had enough to do with a vegetable garden, chickens, 2 cows, and a goat. And then the woman was left alone with 5 children, the eldest of whom was little, and so it began. At first, it seemed that the family would manage to stay afloat. But soon it became obvious no, it wasn't going to work. The money was woefully short. We had to sell the animals, but the proceeds were not enough for long. Mother tried to work, but for some reason she didn't stay anywhere for long. And there were no suitable vacancies in the village. And somehow the woman started drinking. Apparently, when she got drunk, she forgot about what was weighing her down so much. The loss of a loved one, moneylessness, lack of work, need. The children were left to fend for themselves. The house was always dirty and uncomfortable now. Leslie, as the eldest, tried to keep order and bring up her younger siblings. But she was just a child herself. Looking at what was going on, Leslie was determined she didn't want to live like that. She'd have a different fate already. While her brothers and sisters rejoiced in freedom, as no one controls you, does not make you clean or prepare homework, Leslie studied. She realized that in order to make it in the people, she needed to get an education. And for that she would have to sweat. Leslie was praised at school, put the girl as an example to her classmates, and for good reason. Everyone knew in what conditions Leslie lives, and yet she managed to always look clean, tidy, and still on one studied. Toward the end of 9th grade, the girl decided on her future profession. She will become a teacher. She was good at getting along with children, especially with kids. She herself taught all her youngest to read and write, although they initially resisted. But Leslie managed to find an approach to everyone, and the girl also enjoyed looking after the children of neighbors. But not just watched that they did not climb anywhere, and taught them useful things. Those who are younger, colors and shapes; those who are older, letters and numbers. The children's parents were thrilled with the results. They paid the clever girl with food and sweets, and all as one said that she would make a wonderful teacher. Actually, the adults pushed Leslie on the idea of her future profession. Time flew by, and now Leslie received her red certificate with only A's on graduation. Teachers helped the girl to apply to teacher training college and got her a dormitory. There was no hope for Leslie's mother in this regard. She had completely lost her way, turned into a semblance of her old self. It was obvious to everyone that nothing could be done here. The younger children were placed in an orphanage. It was simply dangerous for them to stay with such a parent. At least Leslie used to look after them, but the girl needs to study. Leslie felt sorry for the younger siblings, but she realized that they would really be better off in the orphanage. There they would at least be fed and sent to school, and what awaits children at home? Hunger, cold, and dirt. Leslie had a new life. She gladly took up her studies. The girl was used to learning. She liked it to learn new things, to become smarter and more experienced. Soon she even became the best student of her course. She was again put as an example, but now already to her classmates. It was very pleasant. In the process of training, Leslie suddenly realized that she liked to work with difficult children, with ordinary children. It's easy. But the kids with special developmental needs, this is a more interesting task, and the results here bring great joy. That's why Leslie specifically asked for an internship at a remedial school. There she immediately found out that she knows how to find an approach even to the most difficult children. With her contacted children with very serious diagnoses to which even experienced specialists could not reach. You have a gift, no other way. surprised the head of the educational institution. Leslie only smiled embarrassedly. She was different from childhood, modest and shy. That was her character. After graduating from college, Leslie was immediately hired at the very school where she was interning. The salary was pennies, but this money was still enough for food and rent a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't any kind of housing, but it was almost her own. By that time, Leslie's sisters had graduated from the orphanage. One of them had managed to get a profession as a seamstress. The other became a confectioner. Both immediately jumped into marriage, and quite successfully. Their husbands happened to be from out of town. Of course, they took their wives with them. Leslie was happy for her sister and a little surprised because they were younger than her, very young, almost still children, and already married ladies. Now you can not worry about them. The fate of the girls will turn out well. However, they will rarely see each other. After all, they are now separated by 1,000 kilometers. But that's not the main thing. The sisters now have husbands, have education, have jobs. You don't have to worry about them. And Leslie's two younger brothers have been adopted. Sam and Max, twins with hair, the color of dried flax and piercing blue eyes. The boys came to the orphanage as young children. They were barely 8 years old. Beautiful as from a postcard, bright smiling, they were quickly taken into a family and driven out of town. Leslie didn't know where her brothers were. Now the secret of adoption, but in the orphanage she was told that their new parents are very good, wealthy people. So about the fate of the little brother can also not worry. The mother with her. During Leslie's college years, a tragic story happened during another party, which the mother regularly arranged in her empty house. One of the guests fell asleep with her over a cigarette stew. The wooden building burst into flames like a torch. Some of the guests managed to escape the burning building, but the mother and several others did not escape. Perhaps they were already deeply asleep and did not notice anything at all. It's scary to think what would have happened to the siblings if they hadn't ended up in an orphanage. So by her 20s, Leslie was left in this world for practically a day. No mother. Brothers and sisters have traveled to different corners of the vast homeland. Not even a home left for the girl. But Leslie was not discouraged. She had a desirable profession, her favorite job. It is hard, of course, alone, but she will cope. All the more so, she had her whole life ahead of her, and her love she will still meet, and her children will be born, and their apartment will be big and cozy. Leslie will never repeat her mother's fate. That's how the young girl lived in a rented apartment. She worked, went with her friends to the movies and attractions, engaged in self-education, read a lot of additional literature on the education of special children, and then age, perhaps, took its toll. One day Leslie realized that she couldn't and didn't want to be alone anymore. She needed someone near and dear to her, someone who cared about her and she would care about him too. How great it is to fall asleep and wake up next to a loved one, to talk with him on various topics, to support each other, to make plans for the future. Would Teddy have made such an impression on Leslie if he had met her at another time? Perhaps the girl fell in love with him so sincerely and wholeheartedly only because she was already ready to fall in love. She was waiting for it. And then the right candidate came along. Leslie thought about it for a long time afterward, but at the moment of meeting Teddy, such thoughts certainly didn't enter her head. Leslie was on her way back from a friend's birthday party. It was evening. The girl was in high spirits. They'd had a good time. They'd laughed a lot. The girls went to continue the holiday in the club. Leslie refused. She didn't like such places, noisy, crowded, and she didn't have much money left. She'd just have to make it to her next paycheck. Leslie had 2 important appliances out of order this month, a hairdryer and an electric kettle. Unforeseen expenses. Leslie looked lovely that night, and she knew it. Flowing, beautiful, tight-fitting, slim figure, sundress, loose hair, light makeup. The proof of the girl's attractiveness was the stares she felt on her. It was pleasant, though a little disconcerting. "Girl, you are so beautiful. Can I meet you?" The voice sounded from the side. Leslie turned around and met Teddy's eyes. She didn't know it was Teddy then, of course. She saw a great guy in front of her. Kind, open eyes of a beautiful hazel hue. There was a lot going on in them, and there was a light hanging in them, and interest and admiration. You could drown in those eyes, so you don't mind if I walk beside you for a bit. The boy looked questioningly at Leslie. "No," the girl smiled. She really wanted that, to have a stranger walk her home. But at the same time, Leslie was embarrassed by her own desire. They walked through the park. Teddy told his new acquaintance jokes, shared some news, asked her questions about her life. He talked about himself too. Teddy was an easy and pleasant person, charming and relaxed. He had a good tongue. Leslie was immediately bought up by the sincerity with which the guy told about his own life, and she was sincere with him too. Teddy's honesty implied a reciprocal honesty. It turned out that Teddy and Leslie had a lot in common. Teddy too grew up in the village, and he too was the eldest in a large family. But he didn't know his father and didn't remember him. He asked his mother, of course, but she didn't seem to remember who had given her her firstborn. Leslie's mother had started drinking after her husband's death. Teddy's mother had been drinking for as long as the young man could remember. But Teddy, despite the lack of control and upbringing, still finished 9 classes because he understood without it, he will not achieve anything in life. And dreams and ambitions of the guy were always present. So having finished 9 grades, the boy went to the city. The average score of the certificate was not too high. But still, the boy was taken to the construction college. There was a shortage in one of the faculties. It was just luck. Teddy lived with his grandmother during his studies. She'd never been involved in her grandson's life before. She'd cut her failed daughter out of her life, as if at first tried to pull her out of the swamp, but realizing that it was useless, eliminated. But the eldest grandson did not drive away. She welcomed him warmly. She gave him a separate room and even provided him with money at first. Until Teddy found a part-time job. The boy started working early. Life made him do it. While still living with his mother in the village, he mowed grass for someone, helped to paste wallpaper, painted fences for neighbors. They didn't pay much, but there was enough milk for bread. Sometimes there was also enough for sweets. If the boy had not taken care of himself, it is not known whether he would have survived or not, because there was no hope for his mother. He was not interested in anything but the bottle. In the city, there were much more opportunities for part-time work, especially for the management and not afraid of difficulties, student of construction college. So many construction sites and everywhere need helpers ready to do low-skilled work. And the pay was pretty good by Teddy's standards. When I was in college, my little sisters were taken away to an orphanage. Teddy shook his head sadly. Some of the neighbors complained to the guardianship office, and they did the right thing. The girls would have been lost with their mother. I wanted to file a report myself, but I couldn't make up my mind. I thought maybe it was wrong. Teddy visited his sisters in the orphanage, brought them sweets, coloring books, asked about their life. The girls told me that everything was fine, but they still missed their mother despite her attitude to them. And then one day I came and found out that the girls had been taken away to a family. I never saw them again. Maybe we'll meet again someday. Life is long. Leslie couldn't believe her ears. Teddy's story was exactly like her own. By the way, the boy listening to her story was also surprised and looked at her as if she were his own. He even hugged her a few times. And this gesture was so warm and natural that Leslie was not even embarrassed. And then Teddy's grandmother died, and the boy found himself on the street because numerous relatives hustled up and sued the apartment for themselves. Teddy and his mom got nothing. It happens. Not only did the guy lost a family man to whom he had already managed to become very attached, but he also had a heavy load of domestic problems. He had to make amends, and Teddy steadfastly and very honorably withstood the next test. The guy got a full-time job because the money from part-time work would not be enough to rent even the cheapest housing and groceries, and there was only a year left to go to college. It was a difficult period for Teddy. Hard work on the construction site plus studying at night. He had to make it up to keep up with his lectures and keep his job. Teddy was running back and forth. He lost weight. The kid barely slept for months before he got his degree. But he got through it, made it through. But now all I have is a job. Teddy smiled. It's much easier than combining work and study. When I think back to that time, Teddy worked and rented an apartment, just living. Everything seemed to work out well for him, given his background. Time flew by as we talked, and now they were at Leslie's house. The girl was even annoyed. Wow, how fast they got here. I don't think our meeting is accidental, seriously, said Teddy. I've only known you for a little while, but I already feel like you're no stranger to me. Leslie smiled. She had the exact same feeling. Teddy, he was so understanding, so strong, so kind and good. She didn't want to part with him at all. "I'll pick you up tomorrow." "Okay," Teddy asked. "We'll go for a walk somewhere. I'll show you my favorite places in town. I'm sure you don't know about any of them. So how would you like that?" Of course, Leslie didn't mind. You bet. The young people exchanged phone numbers and hugged goodbye. Teddy did not dare to kiss the girl at that time. It happened a little later, during the very first date they had agreed on. It's an evening of getting to know each other. Leslie couldn't get enough of Teddy. She finally had a boyfriend. And what a guy! In any company, he immediately became his own, thanks to his innate talent for making people laugh. Teddy knew and could do so many things. And of course, he had a lot of friends. They would call him every now and then and ask him to go out. And Teddy would tell them he couldn't because he was out with his girlfriend. Leslie immediately felt very important and significant for the guy, and this feeling filled her heart with warmth. The young people moved in together quickly. Both felt that it would be more profitable for both of them. They didn't want to part after their outings anyway. Renting one apartment was much cheaper than renting two. Teddy moved in with Leslie because his apartment was in a remote area, and it was easier for both of them to get to their workplaces. Teddy turned out to be a good housekeeper. He could cook dinner, fix a screen, and paste wallpaper. Not a single detail escaped his attentive eye. The guy immediately saw the shortcomings and tried to eliminate them. True, during the time of living together, some details became clear. Teddy could not live without his friends. They often called and met somewhere. After such meetings, Teddy always came, but not that drunk, but clearly drunk. It scared Leslie. She remembered what had happened to her mother because of her love of booze, and Teddy's parents were no better. Maybe Teddy would turn out the same way. But the boy only laughed when Leslie shared her worries with him. "Don't worry, I won't repeat my mother's mistakes. I have an example in front of me. That's definitely not going to happen to me." Leslie repeatedly asked Teddy to take her to her friends' houses with her, or to invite these people to their house. The girl wanted to meet the people who were important to her lover, but for some reason, Teddy didn't want those meetings. You see, it's just guys out there. We have our own things to do, our own jokes and conversations. And here you are, a girl tender, fragile. You can't even say a bad word in front of you. And what if someone takes a fancy to you? They'll steal you away. I wouldn't want that. Leslie smiled. She was pleased with Teddy's explanation. Still, he spent too much time with his friends and too often came home like this. The cloudy eyes, the wobbly gait, the odd wandering smile on his lips. This condition frightened Leslie. Several years passed like that. Leslie and Teddy lived together. The young people became almost a family. At first, the girl dreamed that they were about to get married and, like everyone else, start planning children. The prospects were breathtaking. But those hopes were not destined to come true. Teddy was changing. Maybe he'd always been like that. It was just that Leslie looked at her chosen one through rose-colored glasses and didn't notice his faults. And in general, at first Teddy showed his best qualities, trying to charm Leslie. He knew what would attract a girl like Leslie. Teddy disappeared more and more with his friends. Leslie waited for him nights, worried about what could happen to him on the street at such a time. Moreover, several times Teddy had already come home beaten up. Teddy often came home drunk. It happened. In the morning, he'd collapse on the couch and start singing loudly. He only had a couple hours to get ready for work. Naturally, Teddy was not able to work after nighttime drinking, and accordingly, problems with work began. No employer wants a person who can't be relied upon, who would like an employee who can easily oversleep and not show up at the construction site at the right time. Once or twice can still be tolerated. It's not a big deal what kind of situations people have, but when it happened over and over again, Teddy got fired. The periods when the guy was out of work and out of money got worse and longer. During this time, Teddy was supported by Leslie. She paid the rent, she bought groceries, and she also gave him pocket money. He asked for it. The girl couldn't say no. Leslie felt sorry for Teddy. Moreover, every time he repented so sincerely and convincingly assured that it happened for the last time. He planned to get his mind right, explained his attachment to the bottle as a result of a difficult childhood. But how can you not feel sorry for someone like that? It gets better. Teddy wasn't just changing outwardly, he was changing inwardly. He became aggressive. Now the guy could easily yell at Leslie, call her names. Most of the fights were about money. Teddy demanded not such large sums, but Leslie's salary was small. It was barely enough for the bare necessities. Teddy, he just drank the girl's paycheck. Leslie couldn't even afford to go out with the girls once a month, and Teddy hung out at the joint almost every day. He and his buddies took turns throwing banquets. When it was Teddy's turn, he'd ask Leslie for money. He hadn't worked in years. Why would he? He was doing pretty well for himself. Leslie, of course, had long hoped for a miracle. She believed that she could, with her love and attention, pull Teddy out of the swamp, which was dragging him more and more. The girl offered him to go to the movies, dragged him out for a walk in the evening, tried to find him a job. It was all to no avail. A couple of times Leslie wanted to leave Teddy, even packed her things. But Teddy, seeing this, immediately began almost tearfully begging her to stay. I can't handle it. I really can't. I love you so much. I'll be lost without you. You'll see I won't be able to live. Leslie sighed and stayed. She really felt that Teddy would be lost without her. She was very angry with her husband's friends. They were the ones Leslie blamed for what was happening to Teddy. Teddy was such a good guy. That's the kind of guy Leslie fell in love with. But unfortunately, Teddy has fallen into bad company, imaginary company. His friends are dragging him down. Time passed, but Leslie did not see changes for the better. The girl suffered a lot. It is necessary to meet his love and again lose a loved one because of an addiction to drinking. Well, it was not her destiny. Living with Teddy was getting harder and harder. He wasn't working at all anymore, not even a coven like he used to. He was taking money from Leslie. She had to go grocery shopping on her way home on payday. She also transferred the rent to the landlord at once because her card was immediately in the hands of Teddy, who waited impatiently for the day X. And that would be it. No more money. Leslie tried to argue. Of course, she wouldn't give Teddy the card, explaining to him that it was wrong, but then he'd lose his temper, start screaming, smashing everything around him, calling Leslie all kinds of names. His eyes blazed with rage. Leslie was afraid of Teddy at such times, even though he never laid a finger on her. He hadn't yet. Why do you need him like that? Her friends wondered, who were aware of what was going on. Throw him out of the house and let him live the way he wants. If only it were that simple. First of all, Leslie still felt sorry for Teddy and loved him. She was not indifferent to the fate of the guy. Moreover, Leslie even felt responsible for him. Secondly, the girl was elementary afraid. She realized Teddy wouldn't go anywhere, and if Leslie ran away from him, Teddy would chase her. He was getting more and more aggressive. It's just not safe to make someone like that angry. Leslie saw that both Teddy's behavior and her own life were getting worse, but she didn't see any way out of the situation, so she accepted everything as it was. She even tried to justify Teddy, but he didn't beat her. He loved her, and he loved her sincerely. He was cursing when she was going to leave him, and then came that night, that dreadful November evening. Leslie came home early. Today was a short day at the remedial school. The superintendent was celebrating her anniversary. Leslie returned in high spirits. She had received a bonus as one of the best workers. Pennies, of course, like her salary, but still nice, yes. Leslie's paycheck was small, but she liked the work itself. She knew how to deal with special kids. Leslie enjoyed the success of her little students. Each girl looked for an approach, and it was even interesting. But unfortunately, the work in the state agency paid not too generous. Leslie was offered to move to work in a private developmental center. The money promised not bad, but the girl, she could not leave the students who were so drawn to her. Among them were those who did not contact anyone else at all. So for the time being, Leslie was hesitant. So the girl came home early. Teddy was sitting in the kitchen, already far from sober. Leslie was tired. The week had not been easy, and there were mountains of dirty dishes, ashes scattered on the table, crumbs on the floor and things scattered around the room in a mess. Teddy's things. Leslie felt herself starting to get angry. Teddy, what kind of pigsty have you created here? What pigsty? The guy looked around the kitchen with a cloudy look. Clean up after yourself. You need to clean it up now. You clean it up, Teddy said and reached for another cigarette. She's gonna boss me around. I've been at work all day. I'm tired. And you're sitting at home. I don't even require you to cook, though I could. At least you can clean up after yourself. Leslie realized too late that she'd made a mistake by getting drunk with the man. She hadn't expected such a reaction from Teddy. Yes, he could yell, call her hurtful words in response to a remark. But this time, it was different. The guy suddenly grabbed his knife and moved toward Leslie. His eyes burned with malicious fire. "You bitch, I'm so sick of you. Always buzzing around my ear like a pesky fly. Teddy, what are you doing? Put the knife down." Leslie reached for the door in fear. Teddy obeyed and flung the knife away. It fell to the tiled kitchen floor. The guy came up and hit her right in the face so hard that the girl couldn't stay on her feet. She hadn't realized Teddy was so strong. Her cheek immediately flared as if it had been burned by a flame. Tears sprang from her eyes. Fear still gripped Leslie's heart with an icy hand. Teddy was capable of anything now. The girl realized it, saw it in his eyes. Been wanting to do this for a long time. Teddy smirked. "It's going to happen now, in my opinion." "Got it. You won't be opening your mouth at me anymore." Leslie nodded her head. She now understood perfectly well it was impossible to argue with Teddy. He was capable of anything. As if to confirm his words, the boy came up to Leslie and pushed her so hard that she hit her head against the wall. Then Teddy kicked the girl in the back. It must have been a pretty weak kick, but a sharp pain immediately spilled all over her body. "No, who's the boss of the house?" "You'll get more next time," Teddy said, and went back into the bedroom. Naturally, Leslie didn't wait for another time. She realized it was dangerous to stay in the apartment with Teddy. He might even send her to the grave. His eyes were cloudy, half crazy. He was not the man Leslie had once loved. She stood up, waited until she was no longer dizzy, and slipped out the door. She didn't even take her things. She only grabbed the bag she hadn't had time to take off her shoulder. It contained her cell phone, her papers, the essentials. The rest was just a matter of time. The important thing was to get away from Teddy. He's a scary man, a monster, and Teddy is capable of hurting her, maiming her. Even more than that, the girl has never been so afraid for her life. Leslie hurried down the stairs, fearing to hear the footsteps of an angry Teddy behind her. He doesn't think Leslie is capable of such a thing, to run away, but where can she go in the middle of the night? She has no relatives, no money either. Of course, Teddy will be furious when he finds it missing. Leslie wanted to be as far away from home as possible at that moment. The girl popped out into the cold November evening. In what she was wearing, a light coat, uncomfortable heeled half boots. It was cold, dark, uncomfortable. Leslie flew forward, and without seeing the road. To keep warm, the girl jumped on the first bus that came along, so she had time to catch her breath. A warm cabin, a soft chair, cheerful quiet music, a minimum of passengers. Leslie looked at the cityscapes flickering outside the window and thought about where to go. Nothing came to mind. Yes, Leslie had friends, Ashley from work and a former classmate, Susie, but both were married. They both had husbands, kids. I didn't want to embarrass them. Leslie started calling local hotels. As luck would have it, all the rooms were booked. What should we do? "Of course," said the strict woman conductor, interrupting Leslie's frantic attempts to find a place to sleep. The girl inhaled and stepped out of the cozy cabin. A cold rain had begun to fall on the unsightly evening. Leslie's coat was immediately soaked through. The girl was completely frozen. Then she saw a supermarket in the distance, a place where she could wait out the downpour and think calmly about her situation. There must be a way out, and Leslie would find it. She would just have to hide from the rain first. "But I've been sitting here ever since." Leslie looked at Andrew as if awaiting his verdict. "I think we should report him to the police." "I can tell you've never been in this situation before." Leslie smiled. "But the cops will come, and they'll see Teddy's already quite calm and adequate. My words mean nothing to them. There's no sign of a beating. The police will leave, and I'll be alone with Teddy. What do you think he'll do to me after that?" Andrew shook his head. "Yes, Leslie is of course completely right. Teddy would get away with it." "Leslie, don't you have anywhere to go?" "No," the girl sighed sadly. "Don't think anything bad of it. I want to offer you a place to sleep at my place. I have a big house. My daughter and I live there alone. You'll sleep, and then you'll decide what to do next. What do they say? The morning is the wiser in the evening. I'm so sorry to embarrass you, but I really have nowhere to go. That's the truth. So I'll go along with it." Andrew realized it was a strange, risky decision to let a complete stranger into the house. Except he couldn't leave the girl in the lurch. She really needs help. Nothing bad would happen if Leslie slept over. Hannah's nanny looked up in surprise as Andrew let her walk ahead of him into the house. But she didn't say anything. She was a professional of her trade and knew perfectly well not to meddle in the personal affairs of her employers. "Hannah's asleep in her room," the nanny reported. "I wanted to wait for you, but you were very late today. Thank you very much, and I apologize for the delay. Of course you will be compensated for those hours." "I'm sure they will." Nanny smiled. "You are always very generous." Andrew showed Leslie to the guest room. The girl looked around in surprise. It was probably the first time she had ever been in such an environment. High ceilings, wide staircase, stylish interior. "And you and your daughter live here alone?" she asked. "Yes, just the two of us." "Excuse me, but where's the girl's mom?" "She's gone." Andrew sighed. He had long since gotten used to this question. Many people were surprised that the father was raising his daughter alone. "Make yourself comfortable. Take a hot shower. You need to warm up. The refrigerator is down there. Grab whatever you want. There are clean robes in the guest bedroom. All in all, make yourself at home. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for the inconvenience." "No worries at all." Andrew smiled. "The important thing is that you have a good ending." Andrew headed off to his room. On the way, he looked into Hannah's bedroom. The girl was sleeping sweetly under the covers with a hand under her cheek. Her hair was sprawled across the pillow. A light blush played on her cheeks. A nightlight glowed faintly on the nightstand. As always, Hannah was afraid to stay in the dark. Andrew took a quick shower, changed into his pajamas, and laid his head back on the pillow with pleasure. How tired he was today. It was a little strange to realize that there was a stranger in the house right now, a complete stranger. But to Leslie, she was just a confused girl in a difficult situation. Leslie wasn't lying. Andrew could feel it. By his age, he'd learned to be a pretty good judge of character. Andrew woke up from an unusual sound, looked at the clock, almost 4:00. What's wrong? The alarm clock was still hours away from ringing. What had woken him up? It was a soft, gentle singing, something subtly familiar, even native. Andrew lifted himself up and listened. Singing, it sounded like it was coming from Hannah's bedroom. What the hell was that? And then it hit Andrew. He remembered that Leslie, the hard-luck girl he'd picked up from the supermarket, was sleeping in the house tonight. The man jumped up and rushed into Hannah's bedroom. Why was this girl sneaking into his daughter's room? What was on her mind? Andrew was about to rush into the nursery and give his guest a thorough interrogation, but he was stopped by a tinkling baby voice. "One more time. One more time. My mom used to sing it to me." "Okay," Leslie said, and she started singing again. Andrew peered cautiously through the gap between the wall and the ajar door to the bedroom. An idyllic picture appeared before his eyes. Hannah was lying in her crib, looking up at Leslie with a smile. His little girl was smiling, and his guest was sitting nearby in a high chair. She stroked the girl's head, looked at her fondly, and sang a lullaby. Andrew remembered the song now. Alice had indeed sung it to little Hannah. But how had the little girl memorized it? She wasn't even 2 years old then. Leslie was singing. Andrew looked at her and at his daughter and could not understand. Had he just heard Hannah talking to Leslie, or was he just imagining it? No, the girl clearly said a few sentences and asked Leslie to sing the songs again, and said it was the lullaby her mom used to sing. The man's heart was pounding at a frantic pace. He forbade himself to hope that Hannah had actually spoken moments ago. Most likely he had just imagined it. The man realized it was impossible to burst into the room now and disrupt this. He waited patiently by the door, hoping to hear Leslie and Hannah's dialogue again. "But that's it, baby. Time for bed?" Leslie smiled. "Good night," Hannah said clearly. Andrew again could barely keep from sighing loudly, and in surprise, "Just don't you go. I'll see you tomorrow, won't I?" "Yeah, I'll see you." Leslie walked out of the bedroom, quietly closing the door behind her, and ran into Andrew. "Oh, we woke you up." The girl became agitated. "Sorry, didn't mean to just." The girl screamed in her sleep. She was having a bad dream. I ran to comfort her out of habit. That's what I always do with my students. But then you started singing her a song. Hannah liked it. "How did you know her name was Hannah?" "I didn't tell you that." "How?" said Leslie, surprised. the girl told me herself. We met her. Let's go into the living room. I have a serious conversation to have with you. Okay. Leslie flapped her eyes in confusion. She couldn't understand what was going on. In the living room, Andrew slowly, thoroughly told the guest the story of Hannah. He had to mention his wife's death and the girl's many diagnoses. You see, ever since Alice died, Hannah hasn't spoken a word, and now all of a sudden, she's talking. And I didn't realize the girl was speechless. She got in touch with me as soon as she heard the lullaby. She said her mom used to sing that song to her. Wow. The poor child still remembers it, although she seemed to be quite tiny at the time. I have a suggestion for you, since you have such a favorable influence on Hannah. You're also a teacher. You have experience with special children. Could you be a nanny or a teacher for my girl? You have nowhere to live, and here you will have your own room. I won't begrudge you a salary. Wow. This is so unexpected. I'd love to be a nanny for Hannah, but I have a job. I can't leave my students, you know. I see. You don't have to sit with her all day. The main thing is to come here after work, socialize with Hannah on the weekends, maybe do some activities with her or just walk around. Naturally, if you need time to yourself, that's not even negotiable. At any moment, Andrew was willing to do anything to keep Leslie close to Hannah. That girl had worked a real miracle. But what if she suddenly disappeared and his girl went silent again? What if Leslie leaving her would be a new stressor for her? Leslie stayed at Andrew's house. She turned out to be a very smiling and friendly girl. Hannah just couldn't get enough of her new nanny, or as she called her friend. Leslie always knew what to do to entertain her. They drew together, molded with plasticine, even embroidered. Hannah was talking now. Andrew couldn't believe it. Strangely enough, Hannah's speech, the little girl, turned out to be very literate, developed. It turns out that all this time she was learning unnoticed from others, absorbed everything like a sponge, and now quietly built beautiful and long friends. And it also turned out that Hannah is an incredibly capable girl. She has a talent for the exact sciences, Leslie said repeatedly. She'll make a great physicist or mathematician. You'll see. Leslie was a little wrong. Hannah turned out to be a promising computer programmer. When in the 5th grade she started computer science, the girl immediately demonstrated outstanding talents. The teacher, of course, could not fail to notice it. She immediately began to send a capable student to Olympiads of various levels, and almost always the girl returned with awards. Andrew could not be pleased with his daughter. He was very grateful to Leslie because it was thanks to her talent, or rather even the gift of communicating with special children, that Hannah began to speak. Leslie leaned in. She assured him that Hannah was not her client. She didn't have any serious diagnoses or disabilities, just stress. That's how she reacted to losing her mother. It had nothing to do with me. She would have talked sooner or later on her own. Andrew didn't agree with Leslie on that. He knew for sure. If it hadn't been for her, his girl would have had to go to a special school for kids with serious mental health problems. And then what would Hannah be like now? By the time Hannah started winning her first awards as a young programmer, Andrew and Leslie were already married. Yes, that's what happened. Andrew and Leslie lived side by side. At first, all their conversations revolved solely around Hannah, and then somehow, gradually, it became clear to both of them that something was going on between them. They were attracted to each other. It was pointless to deny it. By the way, it was not without Hannah's participation. The clever girl saw everything, understood everything, and was very happy about it. It was she who pushed her father to make the first step. One day she told him directly that it was time to ask Leslie on a date. I can see you both need a date. Hannah, then 10, smiled slyly. Come on, take her to the movies already. Do you mind? Why would I mind? On the contrary, I'm all for it. Just next time we'll all go out together somewhere. So, with Hannah's encouragement, Leslie and Andrew started dating. And then more. Soon it became obvious to both of them that they were literally meant for each other. So they got married. Quiet, modest, but very beautiful and somehow cozy. Hannah now had a little sister, Chris. She's 2 years old now. She is very perky and quick, just like her big sister at her age. By the way, it was Hannah who chose the name for the baby. She adored her little sister, didn't socialize with her, taught her everything, dressed up the little girl as a doll, and even boasted about it in front of her many friends. Andrew is happy. He has a favorite loving wife and two wonderful daughters. Healthy, beautiful, smart. They have a close-knit family where everyone loves and supports each other. Leslie and Hannah, they are like girlfriends in general. It is so nice to watch them when they do something together, cooking, discussing plans for tomorrow, choosing outfits for. Sometimes the man wondered what would have happened to him and Hannah if he hadn't met Leslie at the supermarket, or if he'd just passed by as he'd intended at first. Perhaps it was fate itself after all.